The first thing he felt was cold. Not the cold of winter or the wind, but a kind of bone-chilling cold. The cold of a person who hadn't eaten properly in a long time and hadn't slept peacefully in ages. The second thing he felt was pain in his knees, sharp and dull at the same time. Someone had been kneeling on the stone floor, and now that someone was him. The third thing he felt was someone else's memory. It flooded his mind like a bucket of ice-cold water. Names, faces, smells, blows. His mother's tears behind the wall. Debts, shame. 14 years of someone else's life were etched into his brain in the space of 3 heartbeats. Han Ji-eun, a 32-year-old functional training coach from Seoul, opened his eyes in the body of a boy he had never known. A girl was sitting in front of him. She was about 14 years old. She was wearing a ceremonial hanbok, the color of a red maple. She was staring at the floor. Her hands rested on her knees and trembled ever so slightly. On either side of her sat 2 men in expensive clothes. To the left was a man with a heavy jaw and eyes that forgave nothing. To the right was an old man with a mark on his forehead, resembling a drop of water. Behind Ji-eun, someone was breathing quietly. A woman, the mother of this body. He knew this from someone else's memory. She was breathing the way people do when they're clinging to life with their last ounce of strength. Chest breathing. Shallow. Short. The hall was grand but poor. The screens were old. The floor was stone, without carpets. The candles were cheap and sooty. The house of Bayon. An impoverished family. The sole heir on his knees before a stranger's family. An engagement. Ji-eun realized this in an instant. Someone else's memory helpfully filled in the rest. The house of Bayon is selling their son to the house of Stillwater as a junior husband to pay off their debts. The boy doesn't want to. The girl doesn't want to. Both are silent because no one asked them. Ji-eun exhaled slowly. Then he did what he always did when the world around him was falling apart. He began to count. Not money, and not enemies. He began to count the body. The boy's shoulders were hunched inward. His neck jutted forward a good 4 centimeters. Pronounced thoracic kyphosis. Flat lower back. Retroverted pelvis. Slightly valgus knees. Scoliosis. 3rd degree, judging by his posture. Thoracic and ragged breathing. The diaphragm was constricted. The entire kinetic chain of this body was broken from head to toe. 14 years of stress. 14 years of living in a body that no one had taught how to stand properly. Ji-eun thought that if this boy had come to his gym in Seoul, he wouldn't have even let him near the barbell for the first 3 weeks. Just breathing. Just posture. Just basic mobility. But the boy was no longer there. Now Ji-eun was here, and the first thing he did in this new world was straighten his back. Not with a sudden jerk. Smoothly. Just as he'd taught hundreds of clients. Sacral bone back. Lower back in neutral. Open the chest. Lower and rotate the shoulders. Lengthen the neck upward. Chin slightly down. Breathe into the abdomen. Slowly. Deeply. Diaphragmatically. The first normal breath in the 14 years of this body's life. Something cracked softly between his shoulder blades. The vertebrae settled into their proper places. And something changed in the room. Not immediately. It wasn't loud. But the girl across from him looked up. She looked at him as if she'd seen a different person. And she was right. The man with the heavy jaw to the girl's left narrowed his eyes slightly. The old man on the right stopped fingering his rosary beads. The mother behind him held her breath. June sat upright and breathed calmly, and in this room, where everything reeked of fear and humiliation, it looked like a defiant gesture. Although it was simply good posture. The old man spoke. From someone else's memory, June pulled out a name. So Moon-ho, the head of the House of Stillwater, the girl's grandfather. He said that, according to tradition, the bride must demonstrate her family's martial art technique before the groom's family. The man with the heavy jaw nodded. He was the girl's father, So Gi-hyun. He looked at his daughter the way tyrannical coaches look at an athlete before a qualifying round, without love, expecting failure. Ji-eun knew that look. He hated that look with all his heart. The girl stood up. So Mirei. A name from someone else's memory. She walked over to the marble slab that the servants had placed in the center of the hall. The slab was as thick as a palm, white stone with gray veins. Meyer stood before it. Her stance was almost correct. Almost. June spotted the mistake in half a second. Her right heel was 2 centimeters too far forward. Her hips weren't turned enough. Her weight was shifted forward. And her breathing. She was breathing into her chest, short and rapid, like someone on the verge of panic. She raised her right hand, her index finger extended. The technique was called the drop that pierces stone, a signature move of the House of Still Water. One finger, one strike, the marble should crack. Meyer struck. The sound was dull and wet. Her finger bounced off the stone. The slab didn't even waver. Meyer turned pale, so Gi-hyun clenched his jaw. Old man Moonho closed his eyes. Meyer struck a second time. The same sound, the same result. Nothing. The stone remained exactly as it was. The hall fell silent, so silent that Ji-yoon could hear water dripping behind the wall. Meyer raised her hand a third time. Her fingers trembled. She struck. The slab didn't crack. Meyer stood before the stone, staring at her finger. It was red and slightly swollen. Her father, standing behind her, slowly rose to his feet. Ji-yoon realized what was about to happen. Seo Gi-hyun would announce that the engagement was off, that his daughter had brought shame upon the house, that Bae-yeon would receive not a bride, but a bill for his wasted time. Ji-yoon's mother, standing behind him, let out a quiet sob, and Ji-yoon stood up. He wasn't thinking about etiquette. He wasn't thinking about politics. He wasn't thinking about the fact that he was 14 years old in this body and that he was a nobody in this world. He was thinking that this girl's posture was 90% correct, and the remaining 10% was her breathing and weight distribution, and that in 10 years, nobody, not a single person, had bothered to notice it. He walked over to Mirde. She was looking up at him. No, they were the same height. She was looking straight at him. Her eyes were wet, but no tears were falling. She was holding it together. Ji-yoon turned to Seo Gi-hyun and bowed exactly as etiquette from someone else's memory demanded. He said he was asking permission to correct Ms. So's posture. Just once. So Gi-hyun looked at him as if he were a fly. Old man Moonho opened one eye. Ji-yoon waited. So Gi-hyun said nothing. That meant he hadn't forbidden it. Ji-yoon turned to Mire. He didn't touch her. He gestured with his fingers in the air. Move your right heel back 2 centimeters. She adjusted her stance. Tilt your pelvis to the right, just a tiny bit. She tilted it. Now, you're breathing. He told her not to breathe into her chest. Breathe into your abdomen. She said she didn't know how. He said she did. She just never tried it. He asked her to place her hand on her abdomen, below her navel. Breathe in there, slowly. Your stomach should push forward. Your chest shouldn't move. She tried. It didn't work the first time. The second time, it worked halfway. On the third try, her stomach pushed forward, and she took the deepest breath she'd ever taken in her life. June saw her eyes widen. It was a reaction he'd seen hundreds of times. A person breathes correctly for the first time in their life and doesn't understand why the world has suddenly become clearer. Now the strike. He told her not to strike with her hand. Strike with your body's weight. Let your body's weight drop through your finger into the stone. Not the muscles. Gravity. Her entire body and all its mass concentrated through a single point. Meyer looked at him for a long second. Then she turned toward the slab. She assumed her stance. Heel in place, pelvis rotated, breath into the abdomen. Deep. Full. She struck. The sound was different. Dry. Short. Like a snap. The slab split in half. The two halves slid apart and fell to the floor with a crash. The hall fell silent. But it was a different kind of silence. Not one of shame. A ringing silence. So Moonho opened both eyes. So Ji-hyun stood motionless. He wasn't looking at his daughter. He was looking at Ji-woon. He slowly turned his head toward Ji-woon's mother and asked, without speaking, who this boy was. Ji-woon's mother didn't answer. She didn't know herself. Meyer stood in front of the broken stove and looked at her finger. There was no redness or swelling on it. A clean blow leaves no marks. She looked up at Ji-yoon. He saw in her eyes the question she could not ask aloud. He gave her a slight nod. Just a nod. The engagement was confirmed that very hour. So Moonho personally affixed his seal to the scroll. So Ji-hyun did not say another word for the rest of the evening. The guests dispersed before dark. The servants cleared away the shards of marble. Ji-yoon's mother went to her room and finally broke down in tears there. But not out of grief. Ji-yoon found that body that night. It was standing on the roof of the estate. No, he was standing on the roof of the estate. His body, now his. Thin, weak, with a crooked spine and a constricted diaphragm. With hands that had never held anything heavier than a calligraphy brush. He looked up at the sky. The stars were foreign. Not a single familiar constellation. The moon was not white, but slightly greenish. The air smelled different. Everything was foreign. He sat down on the edge of the roof and cried. Once. Briefly. Then he wiped his face with the sleeve of his hanbok and said aloud that it was enough. He said it to himself. 32 years of life had taught him one thing. When everything falls apart, you don't just sit there and cry. You take stock of what you have and work with it. He had a body. A flawed one, but alive. He had knowledge of biomechanics and functional training that didn't exist in this world. He had a mother who cried at night. He had a fiancée who, for the first time in her life, took a proper breath because he showed her how. The morning began with pain. Every vertebra in his back ached as if someone had gone over it with a hammer during the night. Ji-yoon knew why. Yesterday, for the first time in 14 years, he had straightened his spine, and the muscles that had maintained his hunched posture for years were now protesting. A normal reaction. He rolled onto his side. He stood up. His legs felt weak. His knees buckled slightly as he walked. He walked over to the window and looked out at the courtyard of the Bayon estate. The courtyard was small. The fence was crooked in 2 places. The stable stood empty. 3 servants were sweeping the path. One of them was limping on his left leg. Ji-yoon automatically noted the pattern of the limp. Compensation from the hip. Most likely a chronic knee injury, and the body had shifted the load to the left glute. Fixable in a couple of weeks if shown the right exercises. Then he pulled himself together. Now was not the time to fix the servants. Now was the time to fix himself. He stepped out into the courtyard, in a thin robe and barefoot. The stones were cold. The morning air was fresh, scented with pine resin. The 3 servants froze and stared at him. The young master never went out into the courtyard before noon. In fact, the young master hardly ever left his room at all. Ji-yoon found a flat patch of ground by the wall and began. For the first 10 minutes, he simply stood there. He stood in a neutral posture and breathed. Feet hip-width apart, knees slightly bent, pelvis neutral, spine aligned. The crown of his head reaching upward. Inhale into the abdomen for a count of 4. Exhale for a count of 6. This was the basic practice with which he started every new client in Seoul. Only now, the client was himself. His body resisted. His back muscles spasmed on the 3rd inhale. His right shoulder stubbornly crept upward. His left hip locked up when he tried to rotate his pelvis. Ji-yoon took his time. He knew you couldn't rush with a body like this. One mistake and inflammation would set in. And inflammation in a world without ibuprofen is no joke. After 20 minutes, he moved on to mobility exercises. Rotations in the hips. Sliding the shoulder blades across the ribcage. Flexing and extending the thoracic spine. Every movement was small. Careful. From the outside, it looked as if the boy were standing still and swaying slightly. The servants exchanged glances and went back to work. They decided that their young master was meditating. After 40 minutes, Ji-yoon stopped. His body was trembling. Sweat was running down his back. He hadn't made a single forceful movement. He simply stood there, breathing and moving his joints. But for this body, which had spent 14 years sitting at a table with a brush in hand, even that was pushing it to the limit. He sat down on a rock and began to tally his resources. Someone else's memory helped him. The Bayon house was poor, not destitute, but on the brink. 4 generations ago, Bayon had been a strong, middle-ranking house. Then came a series of failed marriages. The ancestral seal had weakened. Techniques had become simpler. Lands had been mortgaged. Allies had turned their backs. This body's father had died 2 years ago. His mother had been running the house alone. Debts hung over the estate like a storm cloud. The engagement with the House of Stillwater was their last chance. Meyer was not the best bride. The House of Stillwater wasn't in the best shape itself, but any alliance was better than none. Ji-yoon ran the numbers in his head. The body would take at least 3 months to restore. The house's finances needed to be sorted out right away. The continent's political landscape needed to be studied before anyone decided that Bayon was weak enough to be finished off. And then there was Meyer. The girl had shattered the slab, but it was just one blow, a single correction. Her body was still in the same condition as it had been yesterday. Asthma, poor posture, a constricted diaphragm. One correct breath doesn't cure 10 years of improper breathing. She needed a program, a real one, with progression, with controlled intensity. With rest. Ji-woon got up from the rock and went to look for his mother. He found her in her study, a small room with a single window. The desk was piled high with scrolls. A woman in her 40s, a gaunt face, once beautiful, now gray from lack of sleep. She looked up and smiled slightly. He pulled her name from someone else's memory. Han So-hee. She asked if he had slept well. He said no. She nodded. She hadn't slept either. Ji-woon sat down across from her and said he wanted to know the exact amount of the house's debts. She looked at him in surprise. The boy she had raised had never asked about debts. The boy she had raised used to practice calligraphy and cry when other children called him weak. But yesterday, that boy stood up in the middle of the engagement ceremony and adjusted the bride's stance, and the bride split the stone. And today, that boy went out into the courtyard before dawn and did something strange for a whole hour. So he decided not to ask any questions. She took out the scrolls and began to explain. The Bayon house's debt amounted to 3,200 gold non. To put that in perspective, the estate's annual income was 400 non. Interest on the debt ate up 120. Maintaining the house cost 200. Salaries for servants and guards amounted to 80. That left 0. Every month, so he had to decide whom not to pay this time. The main creditor was the House of the Golden Scales, a trading house, not a military one, but one connected to the House of the Red Blade. Joe didn't like that. He asked if Bayon had anything of value besides land. So he thought for a moment and said there was a family archive, scrolls containing the techniques of their ancestors. But Bayon's techniques had long been considered weak, and no one would buy them. Ji-woon asked to see the archive. So he led him to the basement, a cold room with stone walls, dusty wooden shelves. The scrolls lay in stacks. Some were 200 years old. Ji-woon picked them up one by one and read them. The foreign memory helped with the language, but not with the meaning. The techniques were described in poetic language. The flow of a river becomes a sword. The breath of a mountain enters the fist. He didn't understand what that meant, until he came to one scroll, an old one, almost falling apart. It contained a diagram, a human body, arrows, dots, lines of force. This wasn't poetry, it was biomechanics, primitive, drawn without any knowledge of anatomy, but the principle was the same. 200 years ago, someone had tried to describe movement not through the seal, but through the body, and that someone had apparently been laughed at because the scroll lay at the very bottom of the stack, covered in a thick layer of dust. Ji-woon sat on the basement floor and read that scroll for 2 hours. Then he went upstairs and told his mother that the archive must not be touched. Not a single scroll was to be sold. She nodded. That same day, a messenger arrived from the House of Stillwater. It was an official invitation for the groom to visit the bride's estate in 2 weeks. Tradition. The groom comes to meet the bride's family. His mother said they needed to prepare gifts. Ji-woon asked what kind of gifts a house that couldn't even pay its servants could possibly afford. His mother fell silent. Ji-woon said he would bring one gift, himself. And if that wasn't enough, then he had no business being part of this union. His mother looked at him for a long time. Then she said he had changed. He said he'd just gotten a good night's sleep. She didn't believe him, but she didn't argue. Ji-woon spent the 2 weeks leading up to the visit on 3 things. First, his body. An hour of training every morning. Breathing, mobility, activation. After 5 days, he could stand straight without pain. After 10 days, he could squat and stand up 20 times in a row without his knees shaking. For a normal person, that's nothing. For a body that had been sitting at a desk for 14 years, it was a breakthrough. Second, security. Ji-woon went out to the estate's 4 guards and watched them train. That word didn't do justice to what he saw. They were swinging their swords. Just swinging them. Without structure. Without understanding. Without a foundation. 2 of the 4 had chronic lower back pain from twisting incorrectly when striking. One compensated for an old right shoulder injury by leaning his entire torso to the left. The 4th was young and healthy, but moved as if his arms and legs belonged to different people. Ji-woon spent an hour with them. He didn't teach them how to fight. He taught them how to stand. He explained how to stand so they wouldn't fall, how to shift their weight so they wouldn't lose their balance, how to breathe when struck so they wouldn't be gasping for air a minute into the fight. The guards listened in silence. They didn't understand how a 14-year-old boy knew such things, but their bodies understood. The body always understands the correct movement. It senses the difference between what works and what doesn't. After 3 days of footwork training, the senior guard named Nam Do-ha approached Ji-woon one evening and said that, for the first time in 5 years, his lower back didn't hurt after training. Ji-woon explained that it was because he had stopped rotating through his lower back and had started rotating through his hips instead. Do-ha looked at him and asked who had taught him that. Ji-woon said he'd read about it in an old scroll from the archives. Do-ha didn't believe him, but accepted the answer. Third, the ancestral seal. That evening, Ji-woon sat in a dark room and tried to sense his seal. A foreign memory told him that Dom Bayon's seal was weak, almost extinguished. The last 3 generations had been born with a faint imprint. The techniques were operating at a quarter of their power. Ji-yoon closed his eyes and searched within himself for what the locals called the seal. He didn't know how it felt, but he knew how his body felt, and after 10 minutes of sitting quietly, he found something. Not in his muscles, not in his bones. Deeper, as if beneath all the layers of muscle and fascia, there was another network. Delicate, barely perceptible, faintly shimmering. The Quiet Water Manor estate was 10 times larger than the Bayonne estate and 100 times sadder. Everything was expensive. Walls of hewn stone, roofs with sea green tiles, gardens with ponds where fish with silvery scales swam. But it was expensive in the old-fashioned way. The tiles were cracked, the ponds were overgrown, the stone was crumbling in places. The house of still water was dying beautifully and slowly. An old man in a silk robe. 2 guards and a maid met Ji-yoon at the gate. The guards were burly. Ji-yoon noted their good posture and heavy hands. The House of Still Water may have fallen on hard times, but they still knew how to train fighters here. The maid led him through 3 courtyards to the guest quarters. The room was spacious. The floor was wooden. The futon was fresh. On the table stood tea and 3 kinds of pastries filled with bean paste. Ji-yoon ate all 3. His body was constantly hungry. 14 years on porridge and vegetables. You can't build muscle on a diet like that. He needed protein, meat, eggs, fish. He made a mental note to sort out his diet once he got home. An hour later, they came for him. Old man So Moon-ho received him in the main hall, alone, without So Gi-hyun, without Mira. This wasn't a family dinner, it was an interrogation. Moon-ho sat on a cushion and looked at Ji-yoon with the eyes of a man who had lived 70 years and seen it all. He said he wanted to understand one thing. Something unusual had happened at the engagement party. His granddaughter had been training the stone-piercing drop for 10 years. The house's best masters had worked on her technique. Not a single one had managed to get it right. But a boy from the Bayonne house, whose family hadn't won a single tournament in 3 generations, corrected her stance in a minute, and the stone cracked. Moon-ho wanted to know how. Ji-yoon thought for 5 seconds. He could have lied, said it was talent, or the seal, or luck. But Moon-ho was no fool. The old man had outlived 4 heads of the houses and 3 political crises. He'd see through a lie faster than Ji-yoon could finish telling it. Ji-yoon told the truth. Not the whole truth, but enough. He said he saw movement, not technique, not the seal, just movement itself. How the body distributes weight, how the muscles engage, where movement flows freely and where it's blocked. And that Mire's technique was correct, completely. Every master who had taught her had done their job. The problem wasn't with the technique, but with the body. Mire was breathing incorrectly, not because she didn't know how, because over the past 10 years, her body had grown accustomed to breathing in a defensive mode. Short breaths, a constricted diaphragm, shoulders hunched. This is the breathing of someone waiting for a blow. Ji-yoon didn't say who Mire was waiting for a blow from. Moon-ho already knew. The old man was silent for a long time. Then he asked if Ji-yoon could do the same with the other students at the house. Ji-yoon said he could, but he wouldn't. Moon-ho raised an eyebrow. Ji-yoon explained. He said that correcting movement wasn't a trick. It was work, long-term, and it's individualized. He couldn't just show up and fix 10 people in a minute. He could take one person and, over the course of weeks, restructure their movement patterns so that their technique would start working at full capacity. But to do that, he needed to see that person every day, to know their body, their injuries, their habits, their fears, because fears also affect movement. Moon-ho stared at him without blinking. Then he said that Ji-woon didn't speak like a 14-year-old boy. Ji-woon replied that 14 years of silence gave him plenty of time for observation. Moon-ho smiled, for the first time during the entire conversation. He said that Mire was waiting for him in the garden, and that So Gi-hyun had left that morning for the border to inspect the outposts and wouldn't be back for at least 10 days. Ji-yoon understood. The old man had taken his father out of the picture, on purpose, to give him time with his granddaughter. He bowed and left. Mire was sitting on a stone bench by the pond. Next to her lay an open book she hadn't been reading. She stood up when she saw him. She bowed. Her hands were trembling again. Ji-woon approached and said she didn't need to bow to her fiancé every time. She said those were the rules. He said rules were important, but her back was more important. She smiled slightly. It was the first time in his presence. They sat down side by side. Ji-woon asked how she was feeling after the engagement. Mire said she was fine. He said she was lying. She looked at him. He said he could tell. Her right shoulder was 1.5 centimeters higher than her left. Her breathing had returned to chest breathing. That meant she was tense again. Something had happened after the engagement. She was silent for 10 seconds. Then she said her father was unhappy, not because she'd broken the stove, but because a boy from a low-status house had helped her. A double disgrace. Her daughter couldn't handle it on her own and had to be rescued by a fiancé they'd bought to pay off their debts. Mireille said this in an even voice. No tears, no tremor. The voice of someone who was used to it. Ji-eun listened. Then he said one thing. He said he hadn't saved her. He'd shown her what she already knew how to do. The technique was hers. The strength was hers. Her breathing was hers too. It just needed to be activated. Mireille looked at him without blinking. He took a scroll with a training schedule from his bosom. He unfolded it in front of her. He explained. Week 1. Breathing. 3 times a day for 10 minutes. Morning, afternoon, evening. Diaphragmatic. Inhale for a count of 4. Exhale for a count of 6. Hold for a count of 2. Push your abdomen forward as you inhale. Ribs out to the sides. Chest remains still. Week 2. Add the stance. The drop's basic stance. Hold it for 5 minutes at a time. Don't strike. Just stand and breathe. Feel how your weight is distributed across your feet. Week 3. Strike, but slowly. 1 strike per minute. Not hard. Precise. Shift your weight through your finger to the target, without muscular effort. Maya read the scroll, and her expression changed. No coach in her life had ever laid out a program like this. She'd always been told to hit harder, hit more often, train more. No one ever told her to stand still and breathe. She asked why the 3rd week and not the first day. Ji-eun said her body first needed to remember how to breathe, then learn to stand, and only then to strike. If she started striking now, she'd tense up again and everything would go back to the way it was. She asked how he knew that. He said he'd been watching. She asked who he'd been watching. He said her. Meyer turned away toward the pond. Ji-eun noticed that the tips of her ears had turned red. He didn't react to it. She's 14. Inside, he's 32. He's a coach, not a little boy. He'll do for her what he'd do for any client. He'll shape her body, teach her how to breathe, give her the tools, and then she'll decide for herself who to be and where to go. Ji-eun spent the next 10 days at the Stillwater estate, working with Mireille every day. Breathing in the morning, posture in the afternoon, movement analysis in the evening. He didn't touch her. He demonstrated on himself. He explained with words. Sometimes he drew diagrams on the ground with a stick. Mireille picked things up quickly, faster than he'd expected. Her body was flexible and agile, and beneath all the layers of tension and compensatory movements lay excellent coordination. By the 3rd day, she was breathing from her diaphragm without being reminded. On the 5th day, she stood in the drop stance, steady and relaxed, breathing so calmly that it seemed as if she were sleeping on her feet. On the 7th day, something happened that Ji-eun hadn't expected. He was sitting on the porch, jotting down his observations, when he sensed it. He didn't see it. He didn't hear it. He sensed it, somewhere deep within his body, a warm pulsation, like a second heartbeat, and along with it came knowledge. Mireille is training right now. She's standing in the stance. Her right leg is slightly tired. Her breathing is steady. There's a slight tension in her left trapezius. Ji-eun froze. He could feel her body. From a distance. No thoughts. No emotions. Body. Like a client's open profile in a trainer's app. He could see where there was tension and where there was relaxation. Where there was constriction and where there was freedom. It was resonance. The family resonance system. He didn't know that word. But someone else's memory revealed a fragment of a legend about how, in ancient marriages between houses, spouses would sometimes sense one another. Only in legends was this romantic. But Ji-eun sensed it as a professional tool. He stood up and walked over to Mireille. He found her in the training yard. She was standing in a stance. Everything was correct except for one thing. Her left trapezius. Just as he'd sensed. He told her to lower her left shoulder by a centimeter. She lowered it. The tension was gone. Meyer looked at him. She didn't ask how he knew, but there was a question in her eyes. Ji-eun said he'd noticed it as he walked by. She nodded. She didn't believe him, but she accepted it. On the 10th day, the second thing happened. Meyer came to morning practice and was breathing freely, completely, without a single tightness. She inhaled all the way down to her lower abdomen. Her exhalation was long and smooth. Her ribs moved freely. Her shoulders were relaxed. Her chest was open. She was breathing like a healthy person, for the first time in her life. Ji-eun asked how she was feeling. She said that she'd woken up this morning without coughing. She usually coughed every morning, since she was 5, every day. Not today. She said this calmly, but her voice faltered slightly on the last word. Ji-yoon nodded. He said it was a good sign. He said the cough would return more than once, but less frequently each time. Her body was readjusting. It takes time. She nodded. Then, she suddenly said she wanted to show him something. She stood in front of a stone pillar by the wall of the training courtyard. The pillar was thicker than the marble slab from her engagement, twice as thick. She assumed a fighting stance. She drew a breath into her belly. She raised her finger, and she struck. The pillar didn't split. It cracked. From top to bottom. The crack ran through the entire stone. Meyer turned to face him. Her eyes were shining. She wasn't smiling. She was glowing. At that moment, Ji-yoon felt her entire body through resonance. Not a single tension. The news spread faster than Ji-yoon had expected. A boy from the now impoverished House of Baeon had arrived at the Stillwater estate and, in 10 days, accomplished what the finest craftsman had failed to do in 10 years. The heiress, So Meyer, had split the training pillar using the stone-piercing drop technique. A pillar that previously only her grandmother, in the prime of her strength, had been able to split. A 14-year-old girl with asthma and trembling hands. Word reached the Council of 12 within a week. And 2 weeks after Ji-yoon's return to the Baeon estate, a delegation from the House of the North Wind arrived at the gates. 3 riders, 2 guards, and 1 girl. The girl was 15. She sat in the saddle the way people who were born on horseback sit. Her back was straight. Her shoulders were squared. Her chin was held higher than necessary. A short bow and a white leather quiver hung from her left hip. On her right was a quiver of arrows, white feathers, steel arrowheads. Pak Hyun, the best young archer of the House of the North Wind. Ji-yoon stood at the gate and watched her. Through the resonance, he felt nothing. She wasn't his fiancée, not yet, but through the eyes of a coach he saw enough. Her right shoulder was half a centimeter higher than her left, an archer's occupational habit. Thousands of shots with her right hand. Her body compensates. Her left hip is slightly tensed. Long rides on horseback. Her breathing is steady, controlled, but the control was rigid, not relaxed. She breathed like a soldier, not an athlete. Through force, not through freedom. Hain jumped down from her horse and looked down at Ji-yoon. She was half a head taller than him. She said she had come on behalf of her house. Her father, Park Tae-yeon, head of the House of the North Wind, had heard interesting things about So-mire's fiancé and wanted to know if they were true or just fairy tales for the poor. Ji-yoon appreciated the phrasing, as insulting as possible with as few words as possible. A professional's work. He bowed and said he was pleased to welcome Lady Park to the humble Bayon residence. Hain snorted. Modest was putting it mildly. She glanced at the crooked fence and the empty stable, and her expression said everything she was thinking. Ji-yoon led her to the guest room, the only one where the roof didn't leak. Sohee's mother served tea and pastries. Hyun sipped her tea and stared at Ji-yoon without blinking. Then she said she wanted to see. Not hear, see. Ji-yoon asked what exactly. She said she wanted to see him do what he supposedly did to Mire. Ji-yoon said he hadn't done anything to Mire. He showed her how to breathe. Hyun smirked. Breathing. The great secret of the boy from Baeon. Breathing. She said she'd been breathing since birth and had somehow managed all this time. Ji-yoon remained silent. He could have explained the difference between breathing that sustains life and breathing that sustains movement. But Haeyeon wasn't Meyer. Meyer needed help and was ready to accept it. Haeyeon didn't need anything and wasn't ready for anything. She had come to prove that the rumors were lies, that the boy from the poorhouse couldn't do anything, that Meyer had just gotten lucky. Ji-yoon decided to show her rather than tell her. He suggested that Hyun take a shot. She raised an eyebrow. He said there was a wall in the courtyard and he could hang up a target. She said she didn't need a target. Let him just call out the distance. He said 100 paces. She laughed. For an archer from the House of the North Wind, 100 paces was just a warm-up. They went out into the courtyard. Ji-yoon measured out 100 paces from the wall and wedged a copper coin on its edge into a crack between the stones. The coin jutted out of the wall like a small, shiny strip 2 millimeters wide. Haeyeon looked at the coin. She looked at Ji-yoon. Then she took out her bow and an arrow. She assumed her stance. She took a breath. She drew the bowstring. She shot. The arrow struck the wall 3 centimeters from the coin. For an ordinary archer, it would have been a magnificent shot. For Hain, it was a miss. She clenched her teeth. She took out a second arrow. She shot. 2 centimeters from the coin. Closer, but still off the mark. The third arrow. 1.5 centimeters. The fourth. 2 centimeters. She flinched backward. Haim lowered her bow and looked at Ji-un. Her eyes were angry. She said that under normal conditions, she could hit the target from 200 steps away. He nodded. He said he believed her. He said the problem wasn't the distance. She asked what it was. He said it was her exhalation. She didn't understand. He explained. When she draws the bowstring, she holds her breath. That's correct. All archers do that. But when she releases the bowstring, she takes a micro-exhalation, a sharp one, uncontrolled. Her right shoulder rises 3 millimeters as she does this. At 100 paces, a 3 millimeter shift in her shoulder turns into a 3 centimeter deviation of the arrow. At 200 paces, it becomes 6. Hain was silent. He could see her mulling over his words in her head. She knew she had inconsistency at 200 paces. She had blamed it on the wind, to the quality of the arrows, to the moisture in the bowstring. She had never thought the problem was her shoulder. She asked how to fix it. He told her to release the bowstring on a long exhale, not to hold her breath until the last moment, but to begin a slow exhale a second before the shot. During a long exhale, the shoulder drops rather than rises. The 3 millimeters would disappear. Ha-in looked at him for 5 seconds. Then she turned toward the wall. She took out an arrow. She assumed her stance. She drew the bowstring. She began to exhale, slowly, long and steady. She released the arrow. The arrow struck the coin. The copper clinked and flew into the grass. Hyun lowered her bow. She stood motionless for 10 seconds. Then she turned to Ji-un. Her expression was strange. Not angry, not surprised, confused. She said she'd been training since she was 5. 10 years. Every day. 3 coaches. 2 masters. None of them had told her about her shoulder. Ji-un shrugged. He said they'd been watching the arrow, but they should have been watching the archer. Hyun was silent. Then she said she'd stay for a few days, if the master didn't mind. Ji-un said the master was happy to have her. Hyun snorted. But she stayed. On the second day, she asked him to show her more. Ji-un placed a coin 200 paces in front of her. She hit it, but he saw something else. When aiming, her torso rotated through her lower back rather than her hips. Her left knee buckled inward slightly as she fired. Her right foot was positioned too narrowly. He pointed out every problem. Hyun listened with her fists clenched. Every word he spoke felt like a slap in the face. Not because he was rude, because he was right. 10 years of training, thousands of shots, and all these years she had been shooting with mistakes so deeply ingrained in her body that they had become part of her movement. She asked why no one had noticed this before. Ji-woon said they had. They just didn't know they were mistakes. Her coaches had grown up in the same tradition. They shot with the same mistakes. For them, it was the norm. She asked him to write out a training program for her, just like he did for Mireille. Ji-un said her program would be different. Mireille had to relearn how to breathe. Ha-in had to retrain her body to move differently. It's harder. It's more painful. Breaking a habit is 10 times harder than learning a new one. She said she was used to pain. He looked at her. Then he asked if she was tired. Hyun paused. No one had ever asked her if she was tired. They asked her how many she'd scored, what place she'd taken, who she'd passed in the rankings. Not if she was tired. She said no. He said she was lying. She had dark circles under her eyes. Her shoulders were tense even when her bow was lowered. Her breathing was steady but strained. It was the breathing of someone who wouldn't allow herself to relax. She didn't argue. On the third day, resonance kicked in. Ji-un hadn't expected it so soon. It had been a week since Meyer left. It had been 3 days with Ha-in. He was sitting in his room that morning when he suddenly sensed a second signal. A different one. Not warm like Meyer's, but cool. Sharp. Ha-in was shooting somewhere in the courtyard. He could feel her right shoulder, tension in her latissimus dorsi, a slight spasm in her left forearm, tiredness in her legs, and something else, subtler, deeper. Loneliness. No, not an emotion. Resonance didn't convey emotions, but Hyun's body was that of a person accustomed to being alone. Back muscles that never relaxed because there was no one to watch her back. Shoulders that were always raised because she was always on guard. A jaw that clenched in her sleep. Ji-un closed his eyes and thought that resonance was both the best and worst tool in the world. The best because it sees everything. The worst because it sees everything. The engagement hadn't been made official. Ha-in had come as a guest, not as a bride. But on the evening of the 5th day, she approached Ji-un and said that her father had proposed the engagement. The House of the North Wind proposes an alliance to the House of Baeon through the marriage of their daughter, Park Ha-in, to the heir, Han Ji-un. She said this in a formal tone, but through resonance, Ji-un could feel her heart beating. He asked what she herself wanted. Ha-in fell silent. Then, she said she wanted to shoot better. He nodded. The engagement was formalized 3 days later. The second scroll, the second seal. This time, Ji-eun felt the resonance convey to him the principle behind Ha-in's movement. Not magic, movement. For 2 months after his second engagement, Ji-eun lived a lifestyle that, in Seoul, would have been called a pre-competition training camp. He'd get up before dawn, an hour of physical training, then an hour with Mireille through resonance. She remained at the still water estate, but he could sense every one of her training sessions from a distance, and every evening he sent a messenger with notes. Move your right leg. Breathe deeper on the third set. Take it easy today. Mireille sent short letters in reply. Terse, polite, but Ji-eun could sense through resonance that she was smiling as she wrote them. Then 2 hours with Ha-in. She lived at the Bayon estate. Officially, as a fiancée on a visit to get to know the place. Unofficially, because she was curious. Hyun trained hard, a 10-year habit. For the first week, Ji-eun tried to get her to slow down. She refused. He said that if she kept shooting 200 arrows a day, her right shoulder would start to creak with every movement in a year. She said her shoulder was already creaking. He said, exactly. She fell silent. Starting the second week, she shot 100 arrows. From the third week on, 50. And every shot became better than the last. Quality over quantity. Ji-eun drilled this principle into her every day. 1 perfect shot is worth 50 average ones. Ha-in resisted. Ha-in argued. Ha-in snorted and called him a stubborn donkey. But she shot 50 arrows, and every one hit its mark. In the evenings, Ji-eun worked with the guards. The estate's 4 guards had changed beyond recognition in a month. Nam Do-ha stopped losing his balance when striking, and his sword became a third faster simply because he stopped wasting energy compensating for his crooked stance. A young guard named Kim Soo-jin learned to coordinate his upper and lower body in a single movement, and his strikes began to come not from his arm, but from his entire body weight. The other 2 followed suit. Ji-eun didn't teach them new techniques. He fixed the old ones, and the repaired old techniques worked better than the new ones used by the neighboring houses. The Bayon house's finances hadn't changed. The debt of 3,200 nan still hung over them as before. But after the engagement with the House of the North Wind, the creditor from the House of the Golden Scales suddenly stopped sending monthly payment reminders. So he said this was a bad sign. When a creditor stops demanding money, it means he's found a way to take something more valuable than money. Ji-eun agreed. The House of the Golden Scales was connected to the House of the Red Blade. And according to the memory of a stranger, the House of the Red Blade was the strongest military house on the continent. Their seal granted such mastery of the blade that over the past 100 years, not a single Red Blade fighter had lost a duel. Their heiress, Im Ji-yeon, was considered the strongest bride of her generation, and if rumors that a boy from Bayon was amplifying the bride's seals tenfold had reached the Red Blade, then they were already planning their response. Ji-eun was preparing. He didn't know exactly what for, but a coach who doesn't prepare his team for a tough game isn't a coach, he's a fan. At the end of the second month, 2 things happened. First, Meyer sent a letter. Not a note. A letter. A long one. 3 pages long. She wrote that her father had returned from the border and watched her train. He saw her smash the training pole. He saw how she breathed. He saw how she stood. He remained silent for 3 days. On the 4th day, he came into her room and, for the first time in 5 years, sat down beside her. He asked who had taught her. She said it was her fiancé. So Ji-hyun was silent for another minute. Then he said he wanted to see this fiancé again. Meyer wrote that her father didn't smile, but for the first time in years, he looked at her without disappointment. Ji-eun read the letter twice. He didn't know what to feel. Through resonance, he knew that So Ji-hyun had hit Meyer. Not often. But he had hit her. And now this man was sitting next to her because she had finally become strong enough to deserve his attention. Ji-eun clenched his jaw and set the letter aside. The second thing. That morning, Ha-in went to the shooting range and set up a target 200 paces away. A coin. On its edge. Just like on the first day. She assumed the stance they'd been practicing for 2 months. A new one. Right shoulder down. Rotation through the hips, not the lower back. Feet wider apart. Knees steady. Breathe into the abdomen. A long exhale. Release the arrow halfway through the exhale. The arrow struck the coin. The coin flew out of the wall and fell into the grass 20 paces away. Ha-in didn't stop. She took out a second arrow. She pinned a new coin in place. 200 paces. Shot. Hit. Third. Hit. Fourth. Fifth. 10th. 10 arrows, 10 coins, 200 paces. Not a single miss. Hein lowered her bow and turned to June. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't snorting. She looked at him silently, her eyes wet. She said it wasn't fair. He asked what? She said it wasn't fair that he'd only shown up now, that for 10 years she'd struggled with mistakes he'd spotted in a minute. That for 10 years, coaches had told her to shoot more instead of shooting better. That for 10 years, she'd thought she just wasn't good enough. Ji-hoon was silent. He didn't know what to say, because there was nothing to say. She was right. It was unfair. This whole world was unfair. A world where strength is determined by blood, not by hard work. A world where girls are taught to hit harder instead of being taught to move more correctly. A world where a coach is considered a servant rather than a key player. He told her the only thing he could. He told her that he was here now, and that they would work. Hein nodded. Then she turned away and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, quickly, so he wouldn't see. He saw, but he pretended not to. That same evening, a messenger arrived. Not from the House of Stillwater, from the Council of 12. An official message on letterhead bearing 12 seals. House Bayon was invited to the annual small review in the capital of Hwasong in 2 months. All heirs of the 12 houses were required to attend. The format of participation was a combat demonstration of ancestral techniques before the council. So he turned pale when she read it. The small review was not a tournament. It was a test. The council assessed the strength of each house through its heirs. A weak heir meant a weak house. A weak house lost its voice in the council. It lost territory. It lost allies. The House of Bayon had not participated in the small review for 6 years, because there was no one to send. The heir was weak. The techniques were lackluster. Every year, So he found a reason to decline. Illness, mourning, financial circumstances. But this year, the invitation wasn't just a formality. It came marked mandatory. Someone on the council wanted to see the Bayon heir. Someone wanted to verify the rumors. Ji-hoon read the message. Then he read it again. Then he sat down and thought. 2 months. In the 4 months he'd been here, his body had improved noticeably. His spine had straightened. His breathing had become easier. His basic mobility had been restored. He could do 50 squats. He could hold a stance for 20 minutes. He could run a lap around the courtyard without getting out of breath. For someone from Seoul, that would be the level of a retiree after rehabilitation. For the world of Hwasan, where masters split stone with their bare hands, it was nothing. His ancestral seal was still dim. The techniques of the Bayon house were operating at half strength. Resonance gave him knowledge of Meyer and Hain's movements, but knowledge is not power. He understood how Meyer struck and how Hyun shot, but his body couldn't replicate either at their level. He was a coach, not a fighter. He had never been a fighter, not even in Seoul. He taught technique to others. He himself was a strong, healthy man who could lift 120 kilograms from a rack, but he had never fought. Not in the ring, not on the street, nowhere. And now he was about to step into the small trial before the 12 strongest families on the continent and put on a combat demonstration. Ji-hoon sat there for 10 minutes. Then he stood up and went out to Hyun. She was cleaning an onion on the porch. He told her about the review. She wasn't surprised. She said she'd expected it. The rumors had reached everyone, and someone wanted to verify them in person. He asked if she could prepare him for the combat demonstration in 2 months. Hain looked at him for a long time. Then she said no. He was weak. His body was weak. His mark was dim. 2 months is nothing. Even the most talented heir of the strongest house trains for 10 years before stepping into the review. He doesn't stand a chance. Ji-hoon nodded. He knew. Then he said he hadn't asked if he could win. He'd asked if she could prepare him. Hae-yoon raised an eyebrow. He said he didn't need to win. He needed to avoid disgrace. To avoid disgracing his mother. To avoid disgracing Meyer. To avoid disgracing Hyun. He would step into the arena and show what he could do. If that wasn't enough, so be it. But he would go in prepared. Hyun was silent. Then she said she was an archer, not a swordmaster's coach. He said he didn't need a swordmaster's coach. He needed someone who understood what the right movement was. She already understood. He had taught her to understand. Now let her teach him. Hyun snorted. Then she stood up. She set her bow aside. She walked over to him. She stood facing him. And she said that if he died at the trial, she would personally come to his funeral and say what she had said. Then she struck him in the chest with her open palm, not hard, testing his stance. He didn't fall. He didn't waver. He stood steady. Because 4 months of working on his stance meant 4 months of working on his stance, and the body remembers. Ha-in nodded. She said they'd start tomorrow. Ji-hoon nodded and left. He stopped on the veranda. Through resonance, he could sense Meyer, far away, at the still water estate. She was training. Her stance was perfect. Her breathing was steady. Not a single tension. He could sense Haeyeon, close by. She was standing around the corner, watching his back. Her shoulders were tense. Her jaw was clenched. But her heart beat calmly. She had made her decision. She would train him. Not because she believed he could succeed, but because he was the first to ask her to teach him, not just show him. Ji-yoon exhaled. 2 months, 2 brides, 4 guards. The 2 months leading up to the small tournament turned into the toughest training cycle of Ji-yoon's life, and of his past life too. Hyun turned out to be a brutal coach, not because she was cruel, but because she held him to the same standard he held her to. Not a single unnecessary movement, not a single meaningless repetition. Every strike was broken down into parts. Each part was drilled until it became second nature. Then it was put back together. She wasn't teaching him sword technique or fist technique. She was teaching him movement. The very same movement he had taught her 2 months ago. Only now he was the student, not the coach. And it was humiliating and wonderful at the same time. The morning began with the basics. Stance, movement, weight transfer. Ji-yoon stood in position and moved around the square step by step. Haeyeon walked around her, correcting her form. Strictly, without compliments. His knee had caved in. His pelvis had sagged. His foot had turned out. She memorized every comment he made about her shooting and returned it to him with interest. On the 3rd day of training, Ji-yoon realized he had a problem he hadn't had in Seoul. His seal. The dim, fading seal of the Baeon house. It gave him nothing. Other heirs had felt the flow of power through their bodies from birth. The seal guided their movements, amplified their strikes, and accelerated their reactions. Ji-yoon had none of that. His seal flickered somewhere deep inside, like a dying lantern in a basement. But there were 2 foreign seals, replicas of Meyer and Hyun's movements. Ji-yoon closed his eyes and reached out toward them. Meyer's seal felt like a vertical line, a fall, weight moving from top to bottom through a single point, the concentration of all mass at the moment of impact. Hyun's seal felt like a horizontal line, flight, the force directed straight ahead without loss during turns. An arrow doesn't lose energy in flight if it's released cleanly. Ji-yoon sat on the floor of the training yard, sorting through these sensations like exercise cards in an old notebook. Vertical and horizontal, fall and flight, point and line. And suddenly he saw it, not with his eyes. Inside, across, the vertical and horizontal lines intersect at a single point. Fall meets flight. The body's weight goes down while the momentum moves forward, simultaneously. It was an impossible movement. Nothing like it existed in this world, because the houses did not mix techniques. Each house trained in its own way. Stillwater struck downward. Northwind shot forward. No one had ever tried to combine them. Ji-yoon stood up. He tried. A step forward while simultaneously shifting his weight downward through his front leg. It came out crooked. His body didn't understand. He tried again. Even worse. The 3rd time, he nearly fell. Hyun watched from the sidelines. She asked what he was doing. He said he was trying something. She asked what exactly. He said he was trying to step and strike at the same time. Not a step followed by a strike. A step that is itself a strike. Hyun frowned. She said it was nonsense. A strike is a strike, and a step is a step. He said that a shot is an exhale. She fell silent, because she remembered. He had taught her to shoot as she exhaled. Not exhale then shoot. An exhale that is the shot itself. 1 action, not 2. Hyun came closer and watched. Ji-woon tried all day. By evening, his legs were trembling with exhaustion. The movements wouldn't come together. His body was too weak for what he was trying to do. But he grasped the principle, and that evening he jotted it down on paper. A cross, vertical plus horizontal, fall plus flight, the basic combination of 2 seals, the first draft of something new. After a week of training, what Ji-yoon had feared happened. Another guest arrived. Yoon Da-hee, heiress of the House of Flame, 17 years old, a head taller than Ji-yoon, broader in the shoulders, with hands that held a heavy 2-handed sword as easily as if it were a chopstick. She arrived alone, no guards, no entourage, on a single horse, in travel clothes without any coats of arms, as if she'd just stopped by on her way somewhere else. But Ji-yoon could see she'd ridden here on purpose. The horse was exhausted. Her clothes were covered in dust from a 3-day journey. She'd ridden non-stop. Why? Da-hee jumped down from her horse and looked at the Baeon estate with the same gaze that Ha-in had given it 2 months earlier. Small, poor, dilapidated. Then she looked at Ji-yoon. He was standing in the courtyard, drenched in sweat from training, wearing old clothes and holding a stick in his hand instead of a sword. 14 years old. Thin, narrow-shouldered, with a stick. Da-hee said she'd expected more. Ji-yoon said he had too. Da-hee didn't laugh. but the corner of her mouth twitched. She said she'd come because she'd heard something. Not about technique, not about the seals, not about tenfold amplification. She'd heard Sohmeyer laughing. Ji-yoon didn't understand. Dahi explained. Sohmeyer and Yoon Dahi had met twice in their lives. At the Council of 12 when they were 10 years old, and at the small review 3 years ago. Both times, Meyer was a quiet, pale girl who coughed into a handkerchief and apologized for every breath she took. Dahi remembered her because Meyer was the only heiress who didn't try to appear stronger than she was. Everyone else wore masks. Meyer just stood there and breathed. Poorly, but honestly. A month ago, a rumor reached Dahi. Not about the stone, not about the technique, about the fact that Meyer was laughing. Loudly, in the training courtyard, after a successful strike. The laughter of heiress Sohmeyer reached the House of Flame faster than any official report, and Dahi wanted to see the person who had done it. Ji-yoon listened and said nothing. Then he said that Meyer had always known how to laugh. It was just that no one had given her a reason to. Dahi looked at him for 5 seconds. Then she said she wanted to stay. Not as a bride, as an observer. Ji-yoon said there wasn't much room, but they'd find a guest room. Ha-in stepped out onto the veranda and saw Dahi. The two girls looked at each other. Ha-in knew Dahi by reputation. Dahi knew Hyun from her tournament results. They had never spoken. Hyun said that the Bayon estate was getting a bit cramped. Dahi said she was used to cramped quarters. Hyun snorted. Dahi sat on the veranda and simply observed for 3 days. She watched Ji-yoon train, how Ha-in corrected him, how they broke down each movement together, how Ji-yoon sat over his notes in the evening and drew diagrams that looked like anatomical sketches. On the 3rd day, she approached him and said she wanted to try. Ji-yoon asked what. She said she wanted him to watch her sword strike. Just watch. Just as he'd watched Maya. Just as he'd watched Ha-in. Ji-yoon nodded. Dahi stepped into the center of the courtyard. She drew her sword, heavy, 2-handed. The blade glowed faintly red. The seal of flame. She assumed a stance, wide, steady. She swung and slashed at the air. The strike was beautiful, powerful. The sword traced an arc and the air hummed. Somewhere at the edge of the courtyard, a tree swayed from the wind blast. Ji-yoon wasn't looking at the sword. He was watching her body. Right leg is the anchor, left leg stepping forward. A hip-driven turn. Good. Her shoulders engage at the right moment. Her arms act as levers. Everything's right. Almost. He saw it. The left knee. During the turn, it shifted slightly inward. By a millimeter. A micro-movement. Imperceptible to the casual observer, but Ji-yoon saw it, and he knew what it meant. An old injury. The ligaments in his left knee had once been damaged, and his body remembered. Ever since then, with every turn, the knee would cave inward to protect the injured area. Her body was compensating, and that compensation was sapping her strength. Dahi was fighting at 90% of her power. 10% was being used to protect her knee, something she wasn't even aware of. Ji-yoon told her about the knee. Dahi froze. Her sword dropped. She looked at him as if he'd struck her. Then she said quietly that 7 years ago, during training, she'd landed awkwardly. Her knee had cracked. A healer from the House of Pure Water had healed it in 3 days. Since then, her knee hadn't hurt. With Dahi's arrival, the Bayon estate ceased to be a quiet place. 3 heiresses from 3 different houses under one roof. Stillwater, Northwind, and House of Flame. Politically, it was an earthquake. 3 houses bound by engagements to an impoverished family whose fence was even leaning. Messengers flew in all directions. The Council of 12 met twice a week. Rumors ran rampant. Some said the boy from Bayon was a sorcerer. Others said he was a charlatan. Still others said he was an agent of one of the great houses. A 4th group remained silent and sharpened their blades. Ji-yoon paid no attention to politics. He had 6 weeks until the small review and 3 brides, each of whom demanded individual attention. Plus his own body, which was still that of a teenager. He drew up a schedule. Mornings from 4 to 6. His body, stance, breathing, movement. The principle of the cross, which he was trying to piece together from the 2 seals. From 6 to 8, Meyer through resonance. She had stayed at the Stillwater estate, but now messengers came every day. The notes had become more detailed. Ji-yoon outlined her schedule for the week ahead, with notes for each day. From 8 to 10, Hyun, shooting, footwork, hip turns. She was progressing at an alarming rate. The coin at 200 paces had become a warm-up. Now he set moving targets for her. He tossed stones into the air. She knocked them down mid-flight. From 10 to 12, Dachi, the knee. That was the hardest part. 7 years of compensatory movements couldn't be corrected in a week. He started small, isolating the muscles around the knee, slow rotations, controlled turns without weight bearing. Dahi gritted her teeth with impatience. She was used to training hard, to strike faster, to hit harder. But Jiun made her stand on one leg and slowly rotate her hip. She said she felt silly. He said it was silly to swing a sword at 90% power for 7 years in a row and not know why. She fell silent. The resonance with Dahi kicked in on the 4th day after the engagement, the 3rd signal. Hot, heavy, like coals in a furnace. Jiun lay on the mattress at night and sensed 3 bodies at once. Meyer is far away, asleep. Her breathing is steady, no tension, good. Ha-in is in the next room, awake. Her shoulder aches. She overtrained that afternoon even though he told her to stop. Stubborn. Dahi is on the veranda. She's not asleep either, sitting and looking at the stars. His knee throbs slightly. His muscles are readjusting. It hurts, but it's right. 3 bodies, 3 client profiles, 3 sets of problems, 3 sets of solutions. Jiun closed his eyes and thought that in Seoul, he'd had a maximum of 8 clients a day, and each one wore him out. Here, he had 3 regular clients 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and he couldn't turn off the resonance. He could always sense them. It was exhausting. But he didn't complain, because they didn't complain. Mire trained every day without fail. Ha-in worked through the pain in her shoulder without letting on. Dahi did those ridiculous knee exercises without a single word of protest after their first conversation. They trusted him, and he had no right to betray that trust. In the 3rd week of preparation for the review, the first assassination attempt took place. Night. Jiun woke up from the resonance, not from his own body, from Ha-in. Her pulse spiked, adrenaline. Her muscles tensed, ready for battle. She sensed the danger before he even woke up. Jiun jumped up and ran out of the room. The courtyard was dark. The moon was hidden behind the clouds. 3 shadows by the wall. Black clothing, masked faces, knives. Ha-in stood on the veranda with a bow in her hands. An arrow knocked on the string. She didn't shoot. She waited. One of the shadows darted toward the house's doors. Nam Do-ha stepped out to meet her, a sword in his right hand. The stance Jiun had been teaching him for 3 months. Low, steady, weight on his back leg. The shadow struck with a knife. Do-ha took a step back and counterattacked. 1 strike, clean, through the thighs. No leaning, no compensation. The shadow fell. A second shadow rushed toward the guest room window, toward Dahi's window. Dahi appeared in the window, sword in hand, barefoot, in her nightgown. But the sword in her hands glowed red, the seal of flame. The shadow recoiled. A 3rd shadow ran toward the gate. Ha-in fired. The arrow pierced the shadow's thigh. Not the head, not the back. The thigh. Ha-in wasn't killing. She was stopping them. 3 minutes later, it was all over. 1 killed by Do-ho, 1 wounded by Ha-in's arrow. 1 fled into the darkness. A young guard, Kim Soo-jin, caught up with him by the river and brought him back. Ji-eun stood in the middle of the courtyard and realized 2 things. First, the guards had handled it. The 4 guards he'd been training for 3 months had taken down 3 professional assassins. Not because they'd become great masters. It was because they had stopped wasting energy on compensations and mistakes. Proper stance and proper footwork turned out to be more important than 10 years of experience with flawed technique. Second, someone wanted to kill him, or kidnap him, or scare him. In any case, someone considered the boy from Bayonne dangerous enough to send assassins after him. The wounded man was interrogated that morning. He said little, but he uttered 1 word. Red. The House of the Red Blade. Jiun wasn't surprised. His mother turned pale. Ha-in clenched her fists. Dahi asked calmly if Jiun wanted her to write to his father. The head of the House of Flame could put pressure on the Red Blade through the council. Jiun said no. He said that as long as the Red Blade was sending night assassins, he was afraid. And as long as he was afraid, it meant he hadn't yet decided on an open confrontation. If the House of Flame intervened, it would become a war of the houses. And wars of the houses were forbidden by the Treaty of the 12. Violating the treaty would give everyone free rein. Dahi looked at him and said he wasn't thinking like a boy. Jiun said he was thinking like a man who didn't want war. She nodded. For the rest of the month, Jiun trained even harder, not because he wanted revenge, because he realized there was less time than he'd thought. The Red Blade wouldn't stop. The next assassination attempt would be more serious. And if Ji-yoon didn't show something convincing at the small review, the Council of 12 wouldn't defend him. And without the Council's protection, House Bayon was just 3 guards and a dilapidated fence. The principle of the cross began to take shape in the 4th week. Not completely, not perfectly, but Ji-yoon had found the movement, a step forward. His weight shifts downward through his front leg. At the same time, the momentum flows forward through his hip, through his shoulder, through his arm. Vertical plus horizontal. Point plus line. The cross. He tried it in training. He struck a wooden post by the wall with his palm. The post swayed. It didn't break. It swayed. But it didn't sway because of the force of the blow. It was because the blow came from 2 directions at once. The pole's structure didn't know which way to compensate, downward or backward, and for a moment it lost its structure. Hyun saw it. Da-hee saw it. Both remained silent. Then Hyun said quietly that she'd never seen anything like it. Da-hee said it was impossible. 2 seals cannot work at the same time. Ji-yoon said they don't work simultaneously. It's a single movement that utilizes the principles of both. It's not magic. It's biomechanics. Da-hee asked what biomechanics was. Ji-yoon said it's the science of how the body creates movement. Hyun asked how he knew about a science that didn't exist. Ji-yoon said he'd read about it in an old scroll. Ha-in snorted. She hadn't believed in scrolls for a long time, but she didn't ask if it was true. Not yet. A week before the selection, a 4th guest arrived. Jung Sera, House of Pure Water, 14 years old, Mire's childhood friend, a healer. She arrived quietly, without fanfare, without guards. She came on foot, a travel bag slung over her shoulder. She said Mire had asked her to check the groom's health before the selection. Ji-yoon agreed. Sera placed her palm on his wrist and closed her eyes. Her seal was that of a healer. She could sense another's body through touch. Bones, muscles, organs, blood. She held his wrist for a minute. Then she opened her eyes and looked at him. For a long time, intently. Like someone who sees something they shouldn't see. She said his body was in good condition. His spine was straight. His breathing was free. His muscles were developing properly. Then she fell silent for 5 seconds and added that his nervous system was unusual. Ji-yoon asked what she meant. Sera said that usually, a 14-year-old boy's nervous system is immature. Neural connections are still forming. His reactions are quick but chaotic. He has the nervous system of an adult, fully developed, stable. As if he were 30, not 14. Ji-yoon didn't move a single facial muscle. He said it was probably because of his training. Sera nodded, but her eyes said she didn't believe him. She stayed the night. In the morning, Ji-yoon found her in the garden. She was sitting by the dry fountain, watching the birds. He sat down beside her. She asked if he wanted to tell her something. He asked what. She said she'd known him since their engagement. The minor review was held in the capital of Hwasong, the city of Taesong. Ji-yoon traveled there for 3 days. Ha-in and Da-hee accompanied him. Meyer arrived separately with a delegation from the House of Stillwater. So-hee stayed at the estate with her guards. She didn't want to let her son go, but she understood she had no choice. Taesong turned out to be a large city. Stone walls 20 meters high, wide streets. A mix of stone and wooden houses. Markets, temples, martial arts schools on every corner. And people. Lots of people. All stronger than him. Ji-yoon could feel it in his bones. In Seoul, he would walk into any dojo and know he was competent. Here, he walked into the city and knew that any guard at the gate could break him in half. The small review arena stood in the center of the city. Round, open air, stone stands with 3,000 seats. The arena floor was paved with white marble. 12 flags lined the perimeter, 12 houses. The Bayon flag was the smallest and the most faded. Delegations had been arriving all day, house after house. Ji-eun watched from his hotel window and counted. The House of the Red Blade, a large delegation, 30 people, guards in red armor. Heiress Im Ji-yeon walked at the front, 17 years old, tall, upright, a sword at her belt, a face like a mask, a beautiful mask, but a mask nonetheless. Ji-eun looked at her and saw a body, perfect posture, perfect gait, every movement controlled, not a single superfluous gesture. It was a body that had been trained since childhood to be a weapon, not a person, a weapon. Behind Ji-yeon walked a man in his 50s, tall, broad-shouldered, gray temples, eyes like 2 knives. Im Gyung-ho, head of the House of the Red Blade, Ji-yeon's father, the man who had sent assassins to the Baeyong estate. Ji-yeon looked at him and felt his jaw clench, not out of fear, out of anger, the calm, coach-like anger.
The kind that doesn't cloud your thinking, but helps you think clearly. The House of Stillwater arrived next, a small delegation, 12 people. So Moonho rode in a palanquin, so Gi-hyun rode a horse, and Mire. Jiun saw her and forgot to breathe for a second, not because she had changed outwardly. She had changed in the way she moved. 4 months ago, she had walked with her head down, her shoulders hunched, her head tucked into her collar. Now she walked upright. Her shoulders were straight, her head was held high. Her stride was steady and confident. Her breathing through resonance was calm, deep, free. She wasn't coughing. Jiun stood by the window, watching her, and thought that this alone made it worth waking up every morning at 4 o'clock in a foreign body in a foreign world. For the sake of that straight back and the free breathing of the 14-year-old girl he was seeing for only the second time in his life. The evening before the review, the delegations gathered for a reception. The Grand Hall in Tesson City Hall. 12 tables, 12 houses. Bayon's table was the smallest. June sat alone at it. Hyun was officially Bayon's fiancée, but at the reception she sat with her house. Protocol. Dahi too. Mir too. He sat alone at the empty table of a small, dead house, eating rice with chopsticks and looking out at the hall. And he saw everything. The heir to the House of the Iron Root, 16 years old, broad as a wardrobe, eats a lot, moves heavily. Left hip is locked, right shoulder is overdeveloped, imbalance, strikes hard but slowly. The heiress of the House of the Silver Crane, 15 years old, slender, flexible, moves gracefully, too graceful, showy. She was taught to look the part, not to fight. Her thoracic spine is overextended. Her lower back is in hyperlordosis. How does she even walk? The heir to the House of the Stone Bridge, 17 years old, calm, heavy, good foundation. But he breathes into his chest. Everyone breathes into their chest. This whole world breathes into its chest. Ji-eun sat and looked out at the hall full of the continent's strongest young fighters and saw in each of them mistakes that no local master would ever correct. Because to them, these aren't mistakes. It's tradition. Im Gyung-ho approached his table. He just walked up. With a glass of wine. With a smile. Polite. Icy. He said he was glad to see the Bayon heir at the review. That the House of Bayon hadn't participated in a long time, and many had already forgotten it even existed. But rumors of the young heir had reached even the Red Blade, and Kyung-ho wanted to see with his own eyes what everyone was talking about. Ji-eun looked up at him. The man towered over him like a tower. Gray eyes, a smile, not a shred of warmth. Ji-eun said he was grateful for the attention and hoped he wouldn't disappoint. Kyung-ho nodded. Then he leaned in a little closer and said quietly that his daughter, Ji-yeon, was performing third, and that the Bayon heir should watch closely to understand the difference between rumors and reality. Then he left. Ji-eun sat there, thinking that this man had just promised him public humiliation in a voice as casual as ordering tea. A true professional. That night, Ji-eun couldn't sleep. He lay in his hotel room and sensed all three of them through resonance. Myers slept peacefully, for the first time without a single tension in her body. Dahi wasn't sleeping. She was sharpening her sword. Her knee ached slightly from the day's journey, but her form held steady. Hyun wasn't sleeping either. She was sitting on the roof of her house's hotel, looking toward the Bayon Hotel. He knew this through resonance, not by the direction of her gaze, by the position of her body. She was turned toward him. The morning of the review. The stands were full. 3,000 spectators. The heads of the 12 houses in the box. The council of 6 elders in their high chairs. The heirs lined up according to the draw. Ji-eun drew number 11, second to last. The heir of the House of the Iron Root stepped out first. He slammed his fist into the arena's marble slab. The slab cracked. The stands roared with approval. Ji-eun watched his strike and saw everything he had seen yesterday. A tense hip, an overexerted shoulder, a powerful but sloppy strike. 30% of the energy went into compensation. If he'd struck cleanly, the slab wouldn't have cracked. It would have shattered. Second to enter was the heiress of the House of the Silver Crane. A dance with fans. Beautiful. Pointless. The fans whistled through the air, but not a single strike carried any real force. A show. The stands clapped because it was beautiful, not because it was dangerous. Im Ji-yeon was the third to enter. The hall fell silent.
She stepped into the arena and stood in the center, a sword in her right hand, a red blade. The seal of the red blade burned along the blade like a living flame. She stood there for 3 seconds. Then she moved. Jiyeon held his breath, not out of fear, out of professional admiration. She was perfect. Every movement was precise. Every turn was exact. The sword moved as an extension of her arm. Her arm was an extension of her shoulder. Her shoulder was an extension of her hip. Her hip was an extension of her foot. The entire kinetic chain worked flawlessly. Not a single misstep. Not a single compensation. Not a single mistake. 7 strikes. Each one sliced through a marble slab. 7 slabs. 7 perfect cuts. She stopped. She sheathed her sword. She bowed. The hall erupted. 3,000 people were cheering. Jiyeon sat quietly, lost in thought. He had just witnessed the finest movement that existed in this world. Perfect. Without a single flaw. And that was precisely why he knew he could show something. Because perfection is the ceiling. And the ceiling means there's nowhere left to grow. With that, Jiyeon had reached the maximum of what a single seal could offer in a single body. Jiyeon was going to show what happens when there are 2 seals. The heirs performed one after another. Number 9, number 10, number 11, him. Jiyeon stood up and stepped into the arena. The arena was white. The marble beneath his feet was cold and smooth. 3,000 eyes watched him from above. Jiyeon stood in the center and felt every one of those gazes. Contemptuous, curious, indifferent. A few pitying. Heir Ba-yeon, the boy from the dead house. Skinny, unarmed, without armor, wearing a simple training hanbok. The stands began to murmur. Someone laughed. The council box remained silent. The 6 elders stared expressionlessly. Im Byung-ho in the houses box smiled slightly. Meyer sat in the still water house section. Her hands were on her knees, back straight. She didn't tremble. Ha-in sat in the north wind house section. Her bow rested on her lap, fingers on the string, a habit. Da-hee stood at the entrance to the arena. She didn't sit down. She stood, her hand on the hilt of her sword. Jiyeon closed his eyes. Inhale into the abdomen. Deep, slow. His diaphragm lowered. His ribs expanded. His abdomen pushed forward. 4 counts. Exhale. 6 counts. Long, smooth, shoulders down, jaw relaxed. He stood with his eyes closed, breathing. 10 seconds. 20. 30. The stands fell silent one by one, because something was happening that they didn't understand. The boy stood motionless, but the air around him was changing. Not the wind, not magic, not the seal. A presence. Jiyeon breathed and, through resonance, reached out to Meyer and Hain at the same time. He wasn't taking their power, he was sensing their principles. Meyer's vertical, fall, weight, point. Hyun's horizontal, flight, direction, line. 2 principles, 2 vectors, 1 cross. He opened his eyes. He looked at the marble slab the servants had placed before him. Standard, the same as all the heirs had, as thick as a palm. June didn't strike it. He walked past it toward the arena wall, a stone wall 3 meters high and 2 meters thick. The wall separated the arena from the stands. It had been built to withstand the master's blows. For 3 centuries, it had stood without a single crack. June stood before the wall. He raised his right hand. His palm was open, not a fist, a palm. The hall fell silent. He took a step, 1 step. His right foot forward. His body weight shifted downward through his foot, through his knee, through his thigh, into the ground, vertical. At the same time, the momentum surged forward through his thigh, through his spine, through his shoulder, through his palm, into the stone, horizontal, across. His palm touched the wall, quietly, almost gently, and the wall cracked. Not from the top, not from the bottom, from the inside. The crack ran through the stone from the point of contact in 4 directions. Up, down, left, right. A cross. A perfect cross inside the stone. The wall did not crumble. It did not collapse. It stood. But inside it were 4 cracks converging at a single point beneath his palm. Jiyeon lowered his hand. He turned toward the stands. He bowed. The silence lasted 5 seconds. Then someone in the council box stood up. An elder, gray-haired, with a long beard. He clapped his hands once. A second elder stood up. He clapped as well. A third. A fourth. All 6 elders stood and clapped. Slowly. Steadily. It wasn't applause. It was acknowledgement. The stands joined in. Not everyone. Maybe half. The other half remained silent. Not out of hostility, out of incomprehension. They had seen the boy touch the wall with his palm and the wall crack. They didn't understand how. It didn't resemble any of the clan's techniques. Not the drop of still water, not the arrow of the north wind, not the red blade. It was something new. In the house of Im Gyung-ho's box, he was no longer smiling. He stared at the cracks in the wall, and for the first time that evening, his face bore an expression that Ji-yoon recognized. Calculation. A cold, rapid calculation. Gyung-ho was calculating.
Calculating just how dangerous this boy was. Calculating what to do with him. Calculating how much time he had. Meyer sat in her section and cried. Quietly, silently. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She wiped them away with her sleeve and they flowed again. So Gi-hyun sat next to her. He stared at the arena and didn't move. Ha-in sat upright, gripping her bow. Her knuckles were white. She wasn't crying. She was smiling. A small, mischievous, satisfied smile. Because 3 months ago, she'd hit a coin from 200 paces away and thought it was a miracle. And now, the boy she'd trained had stepped into the arena of the small tournament and shown the entire continent a move that hadn't existed before. And in part, it was her move. Her principle of the horizontal, her flight, woven into his cross. Da-hee stood at the entrance, her hand on her sword. Her hand was trembling, not from fear, from what she had just seen. The knee. His movement flowed through the knee without a single compensatory motion. A clean turn, a clean weight transfer. And she knew that in a month, when he had fully healed her knee, she would be able to do the same. No, she would be able to do it better. Because she was stronger than him, but he had shown her the way. After Ji-woon's performance, the 12th heir refused to come out. He simply stood up and left. No one took notice. Everyone was staring at the wall. The competition was over. Officially, Im Ji-yeon was declared the winner on points. 7 perfect cuts. Flawless technique. No one disputed it. But unofficially, all of Taesong was talking about only one thing. About the boy from Bayon who touched the wall with his palm and left a cross imprinted on it. That evening, Ji-yeon sat in his hotel room, trembling. His whole body was shaking. His hands were shaking. His legs wouldn't hold him up. His head was splitting. That blow against the wall had taken everything from him. Every last drop of energy. Every ounce of control. The principle of the cross worked, but the body carrying it out was still that of a teenager. Weak. Unhardened. The body managed it through pure technique and 2 foreign seals. But the price was this trembling in his hands and the darkness at the edges of his vision. Hyun came in first, without knocking. After the small review, Ji-yoon's world changed. Before the review, it had been mere rumor. Afterward, it became fact. A boy from Bayon who mastered a technique belonging to no house. 3 engagements to the heiresses of 3 different houses, and a cross-shaped crack in a wall that had stood for 300 years. Messengers poured into the Bayon estate like a river after rain. Proposals for alliances, invitations to receptions, requests for visits. And among them, like stones in a river, 3 proposals of engagement from mid-tier houses. So he read every message and stacked them in a pile. Ji-yoon turned down all 3. Not because he didn't want alliances, because residents only worked with sincere consent, and the girls they sent for him didn't know who he really was. They knew only the rumor, the boy who makes his brides 10 times stronger. They were coming for the power, not for him. Resonance wouldn't work. Ji-yoon knew this for sure. A week after returning from Tesson, Jong-sera arrived. Again. This time, not just for a visit. She brought her belongings. She said her house was proposing an engagement. The House of Pure Water. Related to the House of Still Water, but separate. A healing house. No fighters, no territories, only healers. The smallest and most essential of the 12. Because everyone fights, but everyone gets sick. Ji-yoon asked if it was her decision or the house's. Sarah said the house had proposed it, but she had agreed on her own. He asked why. She was silent for 10 seconds. Then she said she had a gift she hadn't asked for. She feels other people's pain, not like a healer, like a curse. Every person near her is an open wound. She feels his pain, his exhaustion, his fear, since childhood. Every day, she can't turn it off. For years, she's been drowning in other people's pain and can't find the shore. She said that when she sat next to Ji-woon in the garden before the review, she felt silence for the first time in a long time. Not because he doesn't have pain. He does. But his pain is organized, structured, like that of a person who knows what hurts and why. And next to that kind of pain, she can breathe. June listened and understood. He understood because he knew this type of person.
In Seoul, he'd worked with massage therapists and physical therapists who, after 5 years of practice, began to feel other people's tension through their hands. It broke some of them. They'd come home after work and couldn't relax because their bodies still remembered other people's tension. Sarah was like that, only 100 times worse, and with no off switch. He told her he could try to teach her to shut off that channel. She froze. He explained. Her body perceives others' pain through the seal. The seal works through the nervous system. The nervous system reacts to external signals. But the nervous system can be trained, like a muscle. You can teach it to turn on and off on command. Basic neuromuscular regulation, activation control. He didn't know if it would work with the mark, but the principle was the same. Don't block the signal. Teach the body to choose when to accept it. Sarah looked at him, and in her eyes was something Ji-eun had seen only once in his life. In a client in Seoul who had lived with chronic back pain for 3 years, and whom he had helped regain mobility within a month so that the pain went away. The client looked at him with that same gaze. Hope. Real hope. Without guarantees, without certainty. It was just that, for the first time in a long time, someone had said it was worth a try. The engagement was formalized 2 days later. The fourth seal. The fourth resonance. This one was different. Quiet. Deep. Not hot like Dahi's, not cool like Ha'in's, and not warm like Mira's. Transparent, like pure water. Ji-eun sensed Seta's seal and saw no movement, no blow, no shot. He saw a network, a delicate web of neural connections radiating from the center of the body in all directions like the roots of a tree. The healer seal didn't work through muscles, through nerves, through sensations, through contact. And Ji-eun realized 2 things. First, he could use this seal to amplify his resonance, to see not just 3 bodies, but all the bodies around him, to sense every person in the room. Second, 4 seals were too many. That very night, the dreams began. Other people's dreams. He saw a little girl crying in a dark room. It was Mire as a child, the seal's memory. He saw an icy field and a girl with a bow shooting into the darkness. Hyun, 5 years old, her first training session, alone, without her parents. He saw a girl with a sword standing in front of a mirror, trying to smile but unable to. Dahi, 10 years old, after her first tournament. She won, and no one hugged her. He saw a girl pressing her palms to her ears and crying because she could feel the pain of the world around her. Sarah. Always. Since birth. Ji-eun woke up in a sweat. 4 sets of childhood memories. 4 sets of someone else's pain. His nervous system was on fire. His head was splitting. Sarah had warned him. 3 seals was the limit for his body. A 4th would overload his nervous system. He knew this and agreed anyway, because he couldn't say no to a person who was drowning. In the morning, he began training with Sarah. It was the most unusual training session of his life. No strikes, no stances, no weapons. They sat facing each other and breathed. Ji-eun taught her to feel the boundary between her own body and another's. The inhale is you, the exhale is the world. On the inhale, you close yourself off. On the exhale, you open yourself up. Between them lies a boundary. Learn to feel that boundary. Learn to move it. Closer to yourself, further from yourself, as you choose. Sarah tried. Nothing on the first day, nothing on the second. On the 3rd day, she sat with her eyes closed and suddenly opened them, wide, and said it was quiet. Ji-eun asked what was quiet. She said everything was quiet. She couldn't feel him. She couldn't feel Ha-in in the next room. She couldn't feel Da-hee in the courtyard. Silence. Silence for the first time in 14 years. She sat there listening to the silence, tears streaming down her cheeks. Not from pain, from relief. Ji-eun sat beside her, saying nothing, because this was the moment when words were unnecessary. A minute later, the barrier weakened and someone else's pain surged back in. Sarah flinched, but she didn't break. Because now she knew that silence was possible, that there was an off switch. Even if it only worked for a second for now. A second could be stretched to a minute to an hour to a day. They would practice this every day, like a muscle, like breathing, like a stance. At the same time, Ji-eun was working on another problem. Money. The Baeon House's debt of 3,200 nan hadn't gone anywhere. After the review, the creditor from the House of Golden Scales had started sending reminders again, with interest, with hints of property seizure. Ji-eun understood that this was pressure from the Red Blade. Kyung-ho couldn't attack Baeon openly after the review. The council was watching. The 3 engagements made Baeon too high-profile a target. But financial strangulation isn't war. It's business. Ji-un thought about it for 3 days. Replies from the 3 houses arrived within a week. So Moon-ho was the first to agree. The old man sent a short letter containing a single proposal. 500 nan had been transferred. No strings attached, no questions asked. Park Tae-yun, head of the House of the North Wind, was the second to agree, but with a condition. Ha-in must compete in the fall archery tournament under the banner of the House of the North Wind, not ban. Ji-un relayed the condition to Ha-in. She snorted and said she would win the tournament under any banner. The House of Fire was the third to respond. Dahi's father, Yoon Tae-ho, head of the House of Fire. He didn't send a letter, he sent a man, an advisor named Yoon Bo-min, an elderly man with a quiet voice and attentive eyes. Bo-min brought 500 nan and a message. The head of the House of Flame wanted to meet his daughter's fiancé in person, in a month, at the House of Flame estate. Ji-un understood that this was not an invitation. It was a challenge. Yoon Tae-ho wanted to see the boy who had taken his daughter and decide whether this union was worth the price he was paying. But a month was still a month away, and right now, Ji-un had 1,500 nan in his hands. He sent So-hee to the House of the Golden Scales with an offer to pay off the debt. So-hee returned 4 days later. The debt had been paid off. 3,200 nan were paid off for 1,500. The House of Golden Scales agreed because Ji-un turned out to be right. Cash today is better than a dead debt tomorrow, especially when the debtor suddenly acquired 3 allies and a crack in the wall of the small watchtower. So he returned home and, for the first time in years, didn't cry that night. She slept. Ji-un could hear her steady, quiet breathing through the wall. He lay there and thought that for the sake of that breathing alone, it had been worth studying financial management on YouTube between shoots for his squat videos. Freed from debt, the Bayon house began to come back to life. Ji-un invested the remaining money that had been sent to the Bayon house in the estate. New roof tiles, a repaired fence, 4 more guards hired on Nam Do-hee's recommendation. Ji-un got all 8 of them up to speed in 3 weeks. Stance, breathing, footwork. No new techniques, just the fundamentals. Do-ha had grown older and was training the newcomers himself, copying Ji-un's methods. Not perfectly, but good enough. The principle worked even without Ji-un. That was important. The system had to work without him. A coach who is irreplaceable is a bad coach. A good coach creates coaches. 2 weeks after the debt was paid off, the 5th guest arrived. Im-ji-un, heiress to the House of the Red Blade, winner of the small tournament, daughter of the man who sent the assassins. She arrived alone, on horseback, without guards, without coats of arms, in traveling clothes with no identifying marks. She stopped at the gates of the Bayon estate and asked if she could enter. Nam Do-ha came out to meet her, sword in hand. He recognized her. Anyone would have. Im-ji-un's face was known across the entire continent. 7 cuts at the small tournament, the Red Blade. Flawless technique. Do-ha sent for Ji-un. Ji-un came out to the gate and looked at her. Nothing came through the resonance. She wasn't the bride. With his eyes, he saw the same thing he'd seen at the tournament. Perfect posture, perfect movement, a body like a weapon. But up close, he noticed something else. Her right knee. As she dismounted, she shifted her weight slightly onto her left leg, a micro-compensation. Her right knee clicked as she turned. He could see it in her gait. 2 clicks every 10 steps. Imperceptible to everyone else. Noticeable to him. Ji-un said she'd come to talk. Ji-un invited her inside. They sat down in the guest room. Ha-en stood by the door with her bow. Dahi sat on the veranda with a sword on her lap. Neither of them trusted the daughter of the Red Blade. Both were right. Ji-un sat in silence for a minute. Then, she said her father had sent her here. Ji-un nodded. He knew. She said her mission was to find out how his technology worked, to gain his trust. If she succeeded, she would become his fiancée and gain access to the secret. If she failed, she would pass the information on to her father and leave. Ji-un nodded. He knew that too. She fell silent again. Then she said she was telling him this because she was tired. Ji-un waited. She said she was 17 years old, that since she was 5, she had been a weapon of the House of the Red Blade, that she'd been trained to kill before she was taught to read, that every day of her life was scheduled by her father, every strike, every step, every word. She couldn't remember the last time she'd made a decision on her own. She'd come here because her father ordered her to, but she'd told the truth because, for the first time in her life, she wanted to do something of her own choosing, even if that choice costs her her life. Ji-un listened. Then he said one thing. He said he knew why she was here,
that she could tell him later if she wanted to. But for now, her right knee was clicking when she turned, and he'd like to take a look. Ji-yeon froze. She stared at him for 10 seconds. Then something in her face broke. Not a smile, not tears, a mask. The mask she'd worn for 17 years cracked like marble under Ji-woon's palm. She said her knee had been clicking since she was 12. After a training session where her father had forced her to repeat a single strike 400 times in a row. On the 300th repetition, something cracked. She finished all 400, because stopping meant weakness. Ji-yoon closed his eyes for a second. 400 repetitions of a single strike on an injured knee. A 12-year-old girl. He opened his eyes and said he'd check her knee in the morning, and that the guest room was available, and that no one here would lay a finger on her. Ji-yeon nodded. She stood up. She walked toward the door. She stopped. She turned around and said that for the first time in 17 years, someone had offered her a room instead of a task. Then she left. Ha-in came in a minute later. She asked if he believed her. Ji-yoon said that resonance didn't work on her. She wasn't the bride. He couldn't verify her sincerity through her body. Only with time. Ha-yeon asked, "What if she's a spy?" Ji-yoon said that if she were a spy, she'd be the saddest spy he'd ever seen. Ha-yeon snorted. But she didn't argue. Ji-yeon stayed at the estate. Not as a fiancé, as a guest. Resonance didn't trigger. Ji-woon didn't pressure her. He didn't propose an engagement. He simply fixed her knee. 3 weeks of work. Muscle isolation, controlled rotations, slow loading. The same methods he'd used with Da-hee. Except Da-hee had a single injury from 7 years ago. Ji-yeon had 5 years of daily micro-traumas on top of the initial one. Layers of compensatory mechanisms lay like layers of paint on an old wall. Ji-yeon peeled them away one by one, patiently, carefully. Every day Ji-yeon came to training, and every day he saw a new layer. A new compensatory mechanism. A new defense mechanism. The body that had functioned through pain for 17 years was slowly rebuilding itself. But it was rebuilding. In the 3rd week, Ji-yeon stepped out into the courtyard with her sword. She assumed a stance. And she struck. 1 strike. Not 7. 1. The sword sliced through the air, and the wind blast caused the fence to sway even more violently. Hae-in whistled from the veranda. Da-hee dropped her teacup. Ji-yeon lowered her sword and looked at her right hand. Then at her knee. Her knee didn't crack. For the first time in 5 years. She turned to Ji-yoon, and the resonance kicked in. The 5th seal struck Ji-yoon like a train. The seal of the red blade was unlike any of the previous ones. Mir was a drop. Hae-in was an arrow. Da-hee was fire. Sarah was water. Ji-yeon was a blade. Sharp, cold, absolute. The seal imparted to him not just a single principle, but an entire system. The cutting line, the angle of entry, the speed of execution, the point of exit. Every strike of the red blade was an engineering calculation embedded in the muscle memory of generations. And Ji-yeon, as a coach, saw in this calculation the same thing he had seen in all the previous techniques. Errors. Not in the technique itself. The technique was flawless. The errors lay in the philosophy. The red blade trained for killing. Not movement, not the body, not the person. Killing. Every element of the technique existed for a single purpose, to deliver a fatal cut. The fighter's body was a means of delivering the blade into the opponent's flesh. Nothing more. That is why the fighters of the red blade burned out quickly. 20 years in their prime. Then the knees. Then the back. Then retirement at 35 and a life as a cripple. Because a body used as a killing machine wears out like a machine, quickly and irreversibly. At 17, Ji-yeon already had the knee of a 40-year-old veteran. In 10 years, she wouldn't be able to walk without pain. And no one at the House of the Red Blade noticed this, because by then, they would have found a replacement for her. Ji-eun lay on his mattress at night and thought about this. The 5 seals burned him from within. His nervous system throbbed. Other people's childhood memories floated before his closed eyes. Meyer in a dark room. Ha-in on an icy field. Da-hee in front of a mirror. Sarah with her palms over her ears. And now, Ji-yeon, 12 years old. Her father standing over her. 400 repetitions. 301. Her knee cracks. 302. Pain. 303. Tears. 400. The end. Ji-eun opened her eyes and stared at the ceiling. 5 girls. 5 sets of traumas. 5 bodies that had been misused. 5 people whom no one had ever asked what they wanted. He clenched his fists and whispered to the ceiling that he hated this world. Then he stood up and went to train. Because hatred is an emotion, and training is action.
and action is always better. In the morning, he began working on a new combination. 5 seals, 5 principles. Drop, arrow, fire, nerve network, blade, vertical.
Horizontal, arc, web, line. The cross was the first combination, vertical plus horizontal. Now June could see more. Dahi's fire isn't just heat, it's an arc. The sword moves in an arc. The arc connects the vertical and the horizontal into a single circular motion. Sarah's nerve network isn't an attack, it's perception. The ability to sense an opponent before they move, reading his body, seeing his intent in the microscopic tensions of his muscles. Ji-yeon's blade is precision. Not strength, but precision. Hitting exactly where it needs to be. Not a millimeter to the left, not a millimeter to the right. Ji-yeon drew diagrams on paper, and the walls of his room were covered with sketches. Arrows, dots, angles, arcs. It was a training program. Not for one person, for 6. For a team. Each of the 5 girls plus himself. Each does what she does best, and together they do what no single house can do on its own. A week after the 5th engagement, an envoy from the Council of 12 arrived. An official one, with the Council's seal. The rifts were becoming more frequent. Over the past month, 3 new cracks had appeared in the sky on the borders of different houses. The creatures emerging from them were getting bigger, stronger, more aggressive. No ancestral technique worked against them at full strength. The council invited representatives from all the houses to an emergency meeting. June went. This time he wasn't alone. All 5 were with him. Meyer, whom June had picked up from the Stillwater estate along the way, Hyun, Dahi, Sarah, Ji-yeon. 6 on horseback. A small detachment, ridiculous by the continent standards. But through the resonance, Ji-yeon could sense all 5 bodies at once and see how they moved. In unison, naturally, without commands. They rode side by side, their bodies already accustomed to one another. Like musicians in an orchestra who have played together for years and have begun to breathe in time with the music. The council was in session in Taesong, the Hall of the 12. A round table, 12 chairs. For the first time, Ji-yeon sat in the chair of the Bayon house. A small one, in the corner, but he sat there. The reports were grim. The rifts were appearing more and more frequently. The creatures emerging from them lacked seals, and the ancestral techniques were becoming less effective against them with each encounter. It was as if the creatures were learning, adapting. 3 outposts had been destroyed. 2 villages had been evacuated. Casualties were mounting. Each house proposed its own solution. More fighters, more technicians, more seals. No one proposed the most important thing, figuring out what these creatures were, where they came from, and why the ancestral techniques weren't working. Ji-yeon listened for 2 hours. Then he asked to speak. The hall fell silent. A boy from Bayom, with a crack in the wall and 5 brides. I wonder what he'll say. Ji-yeon said something simple. He said he'd seen records about the creatures from the gaps, drawings, descriptions, movement patterns, and he'd noticed one detail that no one else had. The creatures moved like humans. Not like beasts, like humans. With specific patterns, with specific mistakes. And these mistakes were similar to the ones he'd seen in fighters with seals. The same compensations, the same tenses, the same defense mechanisms, as if the creatures had once been human, or had been made from something human. The room fell silent. So Moon-ho looked at Ji-yeon from beneath half-closed eyelids. Im Kyung-ho gripped the armrest of his chair. One of the junior chiefs turned pale. Ji-yeon said that if he was right, then using ancestral techniques against the creatures would be useless. Those techniques were designed for fighting humans. After the council meeting, 3 things happened that changed the course of events. First, the council allocated a section of the border to the House of Bayon to test Ji-yeon's theory. A small one, a single pass, a single breach. If the heir of Bayon could seal it using his method, the council would seriously consider his proposal. If not, then not. Second, Im Kyung-ho asked to speak after Ji-yeon and said that the House of the Red Blade was ready to provide a detachment to support Bayon at the pass, selflessly, as a sign of cooperation. Everyone in the hall understood what that meant. Kyung-ho wanted to have his own people close to Ji-yeon, to watch, to control, and, if necessary, to eliminate him. Ji-yeon accepted the offer. Ha-in said he'd lost his mind. He said that refusing would be a sign of fear, and Kyung-ho feeds on fear just as these creatures feed on the seals. Third, Ji-yeon came to see Ji-yeon that evening after the meeting. She said she knew what kind of unit her father would send. The Red Blade's Elite 5. The house head's personal guard. 5 swordsmen, each capable of killing a master in 3 strikes. Their mission isn't to help. Their mission is to figure out how resonance works. And if Ji-yoon shows any weakness, any at all, they'll finish the job. Ji-yoon nodded. He asked if she could neutralize the squad if necessary. Ji-yeon was silent for 5 seconds. Then she said they were her father's men. The men who had trained her. The men she'd known since childhood. Ji-yoon said he wasn't asking her to kill them. He was asking if she could stop them. Ji-yeon said yes. They set out for the pass 3 days later. 6 of them. Ji-yoon, Meyer, Ha-in, Dahi, Sarah, Ji-yeon. Plus 5 members of the Red Blade who joined them along the way. 5 men in red cloaks. Silent. Professional. Each moved just like Ji-yeon. Cleanly. Precisely. Like a machine. The pass was called Raven's Beak. A narrow passage between 2 mountains. Cliffs on both sides. A river below. And in the sky above the pass, a crack. Black. Jagged, like a tear in fabric. Cold air seeped from it, carrying a scent unlike any other. Not rot, not smoke, something else. Something that doesn't exist in nature. They set up camp half a kilometer from the rift. For the first 2 days, Ji-yoon watched. The creatures emerged from the crack at night, 3 or 4 at a time, humanoid, bipedal, with limbs resembling arms, faceless, eyeless, but with bodies that moved like humans. Ji-yoon watched them through resonance, and resonance showed him what he feared to see. The creatures had seals. Not active ones, dead, extinguished, like the embers of a long-extinguished fire. But the pattern was the same lines, the same knots, the same points of power. These creatures had once been humans with seals, long ago, very long ago, 300 years ago. Ji-yoon sat by the fire and watched the creature wandering at the edge of the camp. It moved like a person with a severe spinal injury, a lateral tilt, compensating with the hip, a fixed thoracic spine, as if its spine had fused into a single bone and the body had spent years trying to walk around that block. He stood up. He stepped closer. 5 tensed. Hain raised her bow. Dahi stood beside her sword. Ji-yoon raised his hand. Stop. He approached the creature, 10 steps away. The creature turned toward him, or rather, turned whatever was in place of its head. Through Sarah's resonance, Ji-yoon could sense her body. The neural network was active. The 4th seal allowed him to sense life, and the creature was alive. Not fully, but something within it was alive. Something remembered. He saw a point. Between the shoulder blades, where a human's rhomboid muscles meet. A knot. The dead seal had tightened around that knot and was holding the creature in place like an anchor. If the knot were removed, the body would lose its shape. It wouldn't die because it was no longer alive in the full sense of the word. It would come undone. Ji-yoon stepped forward. The creature twitched. It lunged at him, quickly. Dahi rushed to intercept it, but Mide was faster. She was standing 20 paces behind. She struck. Not the creature, the ground. Fist down, a stone-piercing drop. But not into the stone, into the ground in front of the creature. The ground trembled. The creature lost its balance for a split second. Ha-in fired. The arrow struck precisely between the shoulder blades. Into the knot. The creature froze. It stood still for a second. 2. Then it began to fade away. Like a shadow under the midday sun. Its contours blurred. The body lost its shape. 10 seconds later, a handful of black ash and the arrow lay on the ground. Silence. The return journey from the past took 2 days. Khan Ayon was waiting for them at the entrance to the Bayonne estate. A 13-year-old girl without a seal. Empty. She was sitting on the ground by the gate with a canvas bag and bruises on her arms. Nam Do-ha found her that morning. She said she had run away. She had been being transported from the House of the Little Branches to the south to be sold as a servant. The caravan had been attacked by creatures from the rift along the road. The guards scattered. The merchants abandoned their goods and slaves and rode off. Ayon had been running through the forest for 2 days. She made it to Bayonne because she'd heard that a man who helps people lived there. Ji-yoon looked at her, small, dirty, hungry, without a mark. In a world where the mark determines a person's worth, she was nobody, a zero, a blank space. He brought her into the house, fed her, gave her clean clothes. So he set aside a room for her. Ayon sat on the futon and looked at him like a little animal that didn't understand why it wasn't being beaten. Ji-yoon crouched down in front of her and asked her to show him her hands. She did. Small, slender, covered in calluses and scrapes. He asked her to stand up and walk around the room. She did. And Ji-yoon saw something he hadn't seen even once in the 1.5 years he'd been in this world. Pure movement. Absolutely pure. Without a single compensatory motion.
without a single unnecessary micro-movement, without the mark.
All of his bride's movements had been distorted by the mark. Their ancestral techniques were imprinted on their bodies from birth and warped their natural patterns. Meyer would fall forward even when walking in a straight line. Hyun would lean forward even when sitting. Dahi would move in an arc even when turning her head. The mark shaped the body. But Aeon was free of it. Her body moved as nature intended, without filters, without distortions, a blank slate. Jiun told her he wanted to propose something. Not an engagement. She was a child. She was 13. He wanted to ask her to become his student. She asked what he would teach her. He said he would teach her how to move. She said she already knew how to move. He said yes, and that was exactly why she would be the best student of all. Young didn't understand, but she agreed, because the choice was between being a student in a warm house and a slave in the south. Jiun began training her that very day. Not clan techniques, earthly ones. The basic movement patterns he taught his clients in Seoul. Squats, bends, lunges, presses, pulls, rotations. The 6 fundamental movements of the human body. No seal, no magic. No ancestral power, just physics, just biomechanics, just the proper functioning of muscles and joints. Ayan picked it up instantly. Her body didn't resist, it didn't compensate, it didn't defend itself. It simply did what it was shown, cleanly, precisely, like water taking the shape of its vessel. 2 weeks later, Ayan was moving so well that Hain stopped in the middle of her training and stared at her, her mouth agape. The girl without a seal was performing a basic lunge with a turn faster and cleaner than the heiress of the House of the North Wind. Not stronger, not more powerful, cleaner. Every gram of energy went into motion. Zero waste, zero compensation. Jiun watched Ayan and thought he was holding proof in his hands. Proof that seals weren't necessary. That the human body was capable of doing exactly the same things without ancestral magic. If taught correctly. If given the right foundation. If not broken from the age of 5 by being forced into a mold devised by ancestors 300 years ago. Ayan was living proof, and in a month, she would be more dangerous than any heir with a seal, because the heirs rely on the seal, but Ayan relies on herself. Between training sessions, Ayan Jiun prepared for the inevitable. Kyung-ho received a report from the pass, and his reaction was exactly what Jiun had expected. The House of the Red Blade demanded an emergency council meeting. The agenda? The heir to the House of Baeon is using a forbidden technique to unite the seals. 300 years ago, the council banned the consolidation of the power of multiple houses within a single person after what happened to the first emperor. Kyung-ho demanded an investigation, or an arrest, or both. Jiun read the message and thought, Kyung-ho was right. Technically, the resonance was doing exactly what had been forbidden. It was gathering the seals within a single person. The fact that Jiun used them differently than the first emperor didn't change that. The council meeting was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Jiun used this time for 3 things. First, he trained the team. All 6 of them, including Ayeon. Not as individual fighters, but as a single unit. In the morning, they did partner drills. Mirei and Ha-in, vertical and horizontal. Dahi and Ji-yeon, arc and line. Sarah was in the center, acting as the group's nervous system. Ayeon was everywhere. Without the seal, she could fit into any pair, fill any gap. In the afternoon, group drills. The 6 of them moved across the estate's courtyard as a single entity, without commands. Through resonance, Jiun sensed every body, and every body sensed him. He was the conductor. They were the orchestra. Second, he sent Sarah to the archives of the House of Pure Water to search for records about the first emperor. Sarah returned 5 days later with information that changed everything. The first emperor wasn't a villain. He was a mentor, like Jiun. 300 years ago, a man named Hwang So-jin gathered the seals of the 12 houses through marriages and alliances, not by force, through trust. He united them not to become a god, but to seal the first wave of the rifts that existed at that time. And he did. But the price was that the united seals would not let him go. They fused with his body, with his nervous system, with his mind. He became a living node where all 12 lines converged, and this node began to change him, not outwardly, inwardly. He ceased to be human. He ceased to remember who he was. He ceased to remember why he had begun. He became an emperor. He became a god in his own eyes, and when the council tried to stop him, he destroyed half the continent. The third. June sat alone on the estate's roof at night, thinking. He thought that resonance was the same ritual. Stretched out, slowed down, disguised, but the same. With each seal, he grew closer to what Hwan So-jin had become. 5 seals, 5 sets of other people's memories every night.
His nervous system was at its limit. What would happen after the 6th? After the 8th? After the 12th? He would become a god. Or go mad. Or both. In the morning, he gathered all 6 of them and told them the truth. The whole truth. About being transported from another world. About his age. About the barbell. About the mother he hadn't called. About resonance, which is a trap. About the first emperor who started out like him and ended up as a monster. He spoke for an hour. No one interrupted. When he finished, the room was silent. Mire sat still. Her breathing was calm. Not a single tense moment. Ha-in clenched and unclenched her fists. Dahi stared at the floor. Seta cried quietly. Ji-yeon sat motionless like a statue. Ayan sat with her mouth open, because she was 13 and had just found out that her coach was from another world. Sarah was the first to speak. She said she knew. Not everything, but she knew he wasn't from here. From the first time she touched his hand. The nervous system of an adult in a child's body. She'd been waiting for him to say it himself. Ha-in was the second to speak. She'd been silent for a long time. Then she said one sentence. She didn't care how old he was. He was the only one who talked to her like a human being. Dahi looked up and said that if he thought they'd abandon him, he was an idiot, because he'd fixed her knee, which had been hurting for 7 years. For that, she'd follow him anywhere. Ji-yeon said he was the first person to see her as a person, not just a blade. Ayan said he was the first person to even notice her at all. Mire stood up. She walked over to him. She placed her palm between his shoulder blades, and she said, "Breathe into this, slowly." Ji-yeon breathed, and for the first time in a year and a half in this world, he felt that he wasn't alone. The Council of 12 gathered in full in the Taesong Hall for the first time in 3 years. 12 chairs, 12 heads of houses, 6 elders in their high seats, podiums for the heirs and advisors. The hall was full, and the hall was waiting for blood. Im Kyung-ho spoke first. He spoke for 20 minutes, calmly, steadily, without raising his voice even once. He laid out the facts. Over the past year and a half, the heir to the Baeon house had collected 5 seals from 5 different houses through engagements. He was using a unification technique prohibited by the Treaty of the 12, following the catastrophe of the first emperor. He had already demonstrated the ability to combine seals at the small review. He had already applied the combined technique in battle at Crow's Beak Pass. Every fact was true. Every fact was a blow. Kyung-ho concluded with a single sentence. He said that 300 years ago, the continent had nearly perished when one man gathered the power of the 12 houses within himself, and that the council must not allow a repeat of that. The hall buzzed. Ji-yeon sat in the Baeon chair and listened. Through resonance, he sensed all 5 of them. Meyer in the still water section. Calm. Ha-in was in the north wind section. Angry. Fingers on the bowstring. Dahi was in the flame section. Tense. Hand on her sword. Sarah was in the pure water section. Eyes closed. Sensing the hall. Ji-yeon wasn't sitting in the red blade section. She was sitting on the Baeon bench, next to Ji-yeon's empty seat. Kyung-ho saw this. His expression didn't change. But through Sarah's resonance, Ji-yeon sensed Kyung-ho's muscles around his eyes tense. A micro-expression. Anger. His daughter had chosen another house. In public. In front of the entire council. The elder asked the Baeon heir to respond to the accusations. Ji-yeon stood up. He stepped into the center of the hall. Small. Thin. A year and a half of training had strengthened his body, but he was still a 15-year-old teenager among adult masters. He looked at the council. At Kyung-ho. At the hall. And said that Im Kyung-ho was right. The hall fell silent. Kyung-ho raised an eyebrow. Ji-yeon said that everything the head of the Red Blade had said was true. He had gathered the 5 seals. He was combining techniques. He was doing what the first emperor had done 300 years ago. But there was one difference. He turned to Kyung-ho and asked if the head of the Red Blade knew why the first emperor had lost himself. Kyung-ho said that power had corrupted him, just as it corrupts anyone who takes more than they can handle. Ji-yeon shook his head. He said that the first emperor had lost himself not because he had taken too much power, but because he had taken it for himself. Hwang So-jin gathered the seals to become stronger, to seal the rifts, to save the world. It all sounds noble, but at the center of each of these desires stood himself, his power, his mission, his greatness. And when the 12 seals entered a single person, they found one thing at the center. Him. And they became him. And he became them. Because there was nothing else. No one else. He was alone. Ji-yeon fell silent for a second. Then he said that he wasn't alone. He was a coach. A coach doesn't become stronger on his own. A coach makes others stronger. Each seal he received through resonance doesn't make him more powerful. It makes the girl from whom it came more powerful. He doesn't hoard power, he returns it, purer, more precise, more correct. And that's why the ritual doesn't work the way it did 300 years ago. Because he isn't at the center. They are at the center. The 6 of them. Each one on her own. Each is stronger than she was. Each chose him herself. Not because he bought them, or forced them, or deceived them. Because he was the only one who looked at their movement and said, "Let's fix this." The hall was silent. Kyung-ho was silent. The elders were silent. Ji-eun turned to Ji-yeon. She was sitting on the Baeon bench, upright, motionless. Her mask was in place.
But her knee wasn't clicking. It wasn't clicking anymore. Ji-eun asked her in front of the entire council, in front of her father, in front of the 12 houses. He asked if she wanted to go home. Silence. Kyung-ho looked at his daughter. For the first time during the entire council meeting, his face was not calm. He waited. Ji-yeon stood up. She looked at her father. She looked at Ji-eun. And she said, no. One word. Quiet. Steady. The first word she had ever spoken of her own free will in her 17 years of life. Kyung-ho slumped back in his chair. Something inside him broke. Not for show. For real. He had lost his daughter. Not on the battlefield. Not from poison. From a single word. No. The elder stood up and said that the council had heard both sides, and that a decision would not be made right now, because there was a problem more important than politics. The rifts. 7 new ones in the last month. The house's methods aren't working. The heir Ba-yeon's method is working. A year has passed. 12 months since the council. 12 months in which Ji-eun sealed 11 rifts. 11 mountain passes. 11 cracks in the sky. 11 times the 6 of them went out to face the creatures that were once human, and 11 times they returned alive. Not everyone made it out unscathed. Dahi broke 3 ribs at the 4th rift. Ha-in suffered a laceration on her shoulder at the 7th. Mire lost consciousness from exhaustion at the 9th. Sarah couldn't get out of bed for 2 days after the 10th because she felt the death of every creature as if it were her own. On the 11th, Ji-yeon killed a creature that looked too much like a human and didn't sleep for 3 nights. Ah-yeon stood beside Ji-eun during every breach and shielded him, without a seal, with her bare hands. Because after a year of training on Earth, a 13-year-old girl without ancestral magic moved faster than masters with seals. Clean, precise, no waste. Every gram of energy put into motion. 0 compensation. Living proof that seals aren't necessary. After every rift, Ji-eun sat with each of them. Not as a coach, as a person. Dahi, after her ribs. He bandaged her chest, and she remained silent, looking away so he wouldn't see that she was in pain. He saw, but he pretended not to. Hyun, after her shoulder. He massaged the muscles around her wound, and she turned her face away so he wouldn't see her expression. He saw, but he stayed silent. Meyer after she fainted. He sat beside her, placing his hand between her shoulder blades and telling her to breathe in slowly until she came to. Sarah after every time. He'd simply pour her some tea and sit silently beside her for 20 minutes. Because even after she learned to shut off the pain, she still needed the silence of being near a living person. Ji-yeon after a sleepless night. She'd come into the kitchen at 3 in the morning, and Ji-eun was already there with tea. They sat in silence. For the first time in her life, she fell asleep without a knife under her pillow. After every battle, Ah-yeon would crawl onto the futon next to Ji-eun and fall asleep instantly because she was 13 and exhausted, and he was the only adult she trusted. The 12th rift was the last one, the biggest. It opened above Taeson, above the capital. A crack in the sky 100 meters wide, black, pulsating. Not dozens of creatures poured out of it, hundreds. And among them was one who stood out from the rest. He was human. He looked like a human. He moved like a human, a man in his 40s, tall, upright, with a face that Ji-eun had seen in the old frescoes in the council hall. Hwang So-jin, the first emperor, 300 years. He stood in the center of Taesong. The creatures parted around him like water. He looked at Ji-eun, and Ji-eun sensed something immense through the resonance. All 12 seals, in a single body, 300 years compressed into a single being. Hwang So-jin was a living nexus where everything converged. All the power of the continent, all the seals, all the lineages, all the techniques. He was what Ji-eun could have become, and what Ji-eun had refused to be.
The council evacuated the city. The 12 houses deployed fighters along the perimeter, but everyone knew that ordinary techniques wouldn't work. No one can stand against the 12 seals in a single body, except for the 6. Ji-un stood in the square before the former emperor and looked at him, and he saw the body that had borne the 12 seals for 300 years. Perfect on the outside, destroyed from within. Through Sarah's resonance, he could see Sogin's nervous system. It was on fire. Every nerve was overloaded.
Every node was jammed. Every pathway was stretched to its limit. The body was held together by the power of the seals, not by life itself. If the seals were removed, the body would crumble, like those creatures at the pass. Sogin spoke. He said he'd been waiting. He'd waited 300 years for someone to repeat what he'd done, to gather the seals, to become the node, to unlock the ritual. He said that Ji-un had disappointed him. 5 seals out of 12. That wasn't enough. Too few to seal all the rifts forever. All 12 were needed, in a single person, in him, or in Ji-un. There's no other way. Ji-un listened. Then he said there was. Sojin asked what it was. Ji-un said he wouldn't gather the 12 seals in one person. He would do the opposite. He would distribute the seals, to everyone, to every person on the continent. Not ancestral, not hereditary, basic ones. The fundamental principles of movement that underlie every seal. Fall, flight, arc, network, line. 6 basic patterns. Anyone can master them, with or without a seal. Ion is living proof. A 13-year-old girl without a seal who moves with greater precision than the masters, because she was shown how. June said that the rifts open because the world remembers unity. It remembers how the 12 became one. The world resists concentration. So the answer lies not in concentration, but in distribution. Not to gather all the seals at a single point, but to share the knowledge with everyone, so that every person can stand correctly, breathe correctly, move correctly. Not by the power of blood, but by their own labor. And then the rifts would have nothing to gravitate toward, because there would be no knot, no single point where everything converges. There would be a network, even, distributed, alive. Sojin looked at him. 300 years of solitude stared at the 15-year-old boy who was proposing to destroy the system for which the emperor had given his life. And Sojin said it was impossible, that the seals were blood, that blood could not be passed on, that ancestral power belonged to clans, not to individuals. June shook his head. He said the seals were not blood. The seals were movement, imprinted on the body, repeated by generations, anchored in the clan's muscle memory. But muscle memory isn't magic. It's training, long, systematic, generational. And if one person can learn to move correctly in 3 weeks, then an entire continent can learn in a generation, without blood, without clans, without seals. Sojin was silent. June could see through resonance how his body was pulsing. The 12 seals fluttered inside him like birds in a cage. They wanted out. They wanted to form a knot. They wanted to converge at a single point. And Sojin had held them for 300 years. Alone. Without help. Without rest. 300 years. June told him something he hadn't heard in 300 years. He said, "Rest." Sojin didn't move. June said he was a coach. He could see the exhaustion, and Sojin was exhausted. 300 years is too long a training session without a break, even for a god. He said Sojin could let go. The seals wouldn't fall into the void. They would return to the homes from which they came, and Jiun would close the rifts. Not alone, with a team. With 6 girls, each of whom is stronger than any general, and with a continent that will learn to move correctly. Because Jiun will create a school. Not an academy for the chosen few, a school for everyone, where they'll be taught not to kill, but to move, to breathe, to stand, to live in their own bodies, without pain, without compensations, without fear. Sojin stood in the middle of the square, old, tired, 300 years of weariness. Around him, the creatures froze one by one, because they were a part of him, his pain, his weariness, his loneliness now given form. He looked at Jiun, then at the 6 girls standing behind the boy. Meyer with her back straight and her breathing steady. Ha-in with her bow and calm shoulders. Da-hee with her sword and healthy knee. Se-ra with silence within. Ji-yun without a mask on her face.
Ayan, without the seal and without fear. 6 of them, all different, all strong, all having chosen to be here. Sojin closed his eyes and let go. The 12 seals emerged from him all at once. 12 streams of light, 12 lines that had been compressed into a single point for 300 years. They vanished into the sky, into the earth, into the air, back to the homes from which they had come. The rift above Tesson began to close, slowly, like a wound that is finally healing. The creatures crumbled to ashes, quietly, without a crash, without an explosion. They simply ceased to exist. Sojin stood in the square, no longer an emperor, no longer a god, an old man, very old, very tired. He took a step, his legs buckled. Ji-un stepped forward and supported him. He offered his shoulder, a thin, teenage shoulder. Sojin leaned on it and said quietly that he hadn't rested in 300 years. Jun said it was the most idiotic training regimen he'd ever seen. Sojin laughed, hoarsely, quietly, for the first time in 300 years. The tear closed. The sky above Tesson cleared. A greenish moon emerged from behind the clouds. The stars were unfamiliar, but Ji-un no longer cried when he looked at them. That evening, he sat in the kitchen of the estate the council had allocated to the Bayon delegation. 6 people surrounded him. Mide was breathing. He held his hand between her shoulder blades. A habit, a ritual, their ritual. Hyun sat next to him, her right shoulder. He massaged it silently. She turned away. He pretended not to notice. Dahi stretched out her legs, her knee. He checked it. Clear. No residual effects. 7 years of an old injury had finally vanished completely. Sarah sat nearby with a cup of tea. He was silent. She was silent. 20 minutes of silence. Their 20 minutes. Ji-yeon sat without a knife. She just sat there, calm for the first time. Aeon slept on the floor next to him, out like a light. 13 years. She was tired. She fell asleep next to him every night, and every night he tucked her in with a blanket and thought that if he ever returned home, he would miss this little person more than anything. Not a single romantic word all evening. Just hands that mend, breathing that evens out, tea that grows cold, silence that heals. A week later, the Council of 12 met for the last time. The agenda? Hwasong's future. Ji-un made a proposal. A school, open to everyone, with no birthright requirements, no seals. The movement's basic principles. Breathing, stance, body mechanics. 6 patterns accessible to everyone. Not a replacement for the seals. A foundation upon which the seals rest more purely and powerfully. For those who have the seals, it is a strengthening. For those who do not, it is an opportunity. The council agreed. Not unanimously. Im Gyung-ho abstained, but it was a majority. They named the school Bayon, after the name of a small, poor house with a crooked fence and 3 servants, a house that no longer existed, because Bayon had become something greater than a house. Bayon had become an idea. The idea that a person is more important than blood, that labor is more important than inheritance, and that a coach is more important than a warrior. Ji-un stood on the roof of the school's new building, a large one, made of stone, with training grounds and dormitories and a kitchen where So-hee was already in charge of the cooks. He looked up at the sky. The stars felt foreign. The moon was greenish. The air smelled different. Everything felt foreign. But Meyer was standing right beside him. And Ha-in, and Da-hee, and Sera, and Ji-yeon, and Ah-yeon, who was sleeping standing up, leaning against his shoulder. And somewhere below, Nam Do-ha was training the first group of new students using the method Ji-un had written down on paper for him. Breathing, stance, movement, simple and correct. Maya came closer. She was breathing freely, deeply. Inhale into the abdomen, a long exhale. No constriction, no asthma, no fear. She asked if he would call his mum. He smiled. He said that the rifts had closed. That was it. And the crack between the worlds had closed with them. There's no turning back. He won't call his mum. Not in this life. Maya placed her palm between his shoulder blades. He exhaled, long, slowly. Just as he taught hundreds of people. Just as he taught her. Just as he taught everyone. The exhale longer than the inhale. One more time. One more time. He stood on the roof of the school that bore the name of his new home. Nearby were the people he had made stronger, who had made him stronger. Below him lay the world he had changed, not with a sword, not with force, not with magic, with resilience, with breath, with care. He was a coach. He had always been a coach. And that was enough.